Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 381, Lost. Zen was after two things. He had come all the way first for the crystal key. Second, the flood dragon spirit was also his target. The cyan dragon inside him was stirring, he could feel his hunger, hot and red and impatient. The flood dragon spirit is either bold or foolish, he chuckled, the sound filling his ears. Since he's so eager to claim his abode in your body, let him enter. I'll be sure to take care of him well. Zen felt a rumble as the cyan dragon's arrogant voice coursed through his ears. And so Zen kept still, letting the flood dragon spirit enter. His presence flashed inside him like white-hot lightning. Ha ha, this is all too easy. Foolish mortal, he dares face me without any protection, the flood dragon taunted in self-satisfaction. Your body will be mine, mortal. I will leave not even a trace of your soul. You have a fine body, solid and strong. I'll start with your flesh and savor your muscles, until not even a fiber is in place. You will be my new shell, and then I will acquire all the refining heritage and arts of the 6th grade sect passed from the ancient time. No one can stop me now. I'll be the emperor, the only master of the whole world. After having been sealed for ages, the flood dragon had lost his control, his spirit turning crazed at the first taste of freedom. Without any obstacles upon entering Zen's mind, he grew more and more self-possessed. He roared in wild laughter, the sound piercing and devastating in the crevices of Zen's mind. Zen was in an imminent danger. The flood dragon spirit was a much stronger soul than any human. He had to be careful. One mistake, and the dragon would take over his body as his new home. The dragon knew the disparity of their strength. There was no way for a weaker soul to guard itself against the attack of such a strong spirit. It could easily be forced out from the body it belonged to. The flood dragon spirit howled in his victory as he occupied Zen's mind. However, his arrogance didn't last long. The dragon's roar came to a sudden halt. The first thing he saw was a huge furnace, its embers smelting. Coiled around it were 9 dragons, each one so vivid and lifelike that no one would have taken them as mere decorations carved on the surface of the burning furnace. The flood dragon's laughter died down in sudden shock at the sight. The cyan dragon twined leisurely on the furnace, fixing his eyes upon the flood dragon. Before the cyan dragon, he seemed no more than a puny snake. What is that, a dragon? A genuine dragon? All of the flood dragon's kind would cower in the presence of a real dragon. They were down below the hierarchy as pseudo-dragons. To hide their true nature as inferior creatures, they dressed themselves in the dragon's name and lived under the noble species shadow. They feared dragons not because they were less capable in terms of magic, but because of the abject blood running in their veins. In the wider scheme of nature, the weak bow down to the strong. The flood dragons were born in the lower rank of creatures. Here, in the presence of a genuine dragon, the flood dragon spirit felt sheer dread creep on his skin. Why is there a dragon? He thought with his trembling body. The real dragon on the mysterious smelting furnace, however, took no interest in answering the question. He squinted his burning eyes at the flood dragon, as if measuring him. In truth, had the 9 dragons not been sealed on the furnace, none of them would waste their time and energy in killing a flood dragon for nourishment. It was unfitting of their dignity. However, as things stood, they had no other choice, being sealed on that smelting furnace. They had to find something to curb their hunger, and the flood dragon happened to be present. Tonight, he would do for a meal. The cyan dragon was famished. Even the lowly flood dragon would do. Just as how a vagrant might eat anything in the face of starvation, nature would take its course and the instinct for survival would win over. The cyan dragon opened his mouth, and at once the flood dragon spirit felt a strong pull, as if he was being swept into a black hole. It happened so quickly that the flood dragon spirit could not even let out a scream before there was nothing but darkness. There was a quiet crunching until the cyan dragon gave off a powerful belch. It was by no means a satisfactory meal, but even the barest of meals would be a feast to a starving soul. The spirit of the flood dragon was refined, and having some remote relations with the dragon, he was good enough to reinforce the energy of the cyan dragon's soul. Zen paid no heed to all the tangled warfare in his mind, keeping his attention on the crystal key. It was already gone the moment the flood dragon spirit appeared. He scanned around with his eyes in search of its traces. Suddenly, a flashing light above caught his attention. He looked up and found the key glistening in the darkness. The flood dragon spirit had hung it high above in the air. The pungent odor that had hung heavily in the air had begun to disperse along with the sallow smog after the flood dragon's disappearance. When the air had cleared, Zen saw Tia walking from behind the last traces of the yellow film of air. She suddenly jumped into the sky like a nimble bird, fetching the crystal key when it was within her arm's reach. A smile broke across her face when she looked at the key in her hand. She had been dreaming of the crystal key for so long a time, and finally, she had it in her hands. Just as Tia held the crystal key, a fierce roar rumbled, shattering the temporary peace. The head of a huge fiery dragon poked out from entrance of the cave that Tia had just damaged. The fiery dragon spirit, it's still here, but it's so big now. What happened? Both Zen and Tia were momentarily shocked at the sudden sight of the huge dragon. The fiery dragon spirit was a fierce species with tremendous power. Tia had already been struggling with its attacks in its smaller form. How could they deal with it now when it had grown so large? The fiery dragon spirit caught sight of the crystal key in Tia's hand. It let out a fierce roar and dashed towards her at a fast speed, its eyes fixed on the key. Back off, Zen, Tia warned, her voice hard with seriousness. The lines of her face tightened as she prepared for the fiery dragon spirit's attack. Stretching out her arms, she formed an ice column between her wrists. It was about the height of a human. At its core, a tiny feather of ice phoenix gleamed in the confines of ice. It was a real feather of the ice phoenix. Tia had summoned a small ice phoenix when she had been fighting with the fiery dragon. It was a spiritual projection, a creature imagined through techniques of meditation. Many warriors could create and give a physical form to various things and species from their minds. These creations dissolved once they were used. Some warriors, however, were capable of bringing creatures into actual being. It was a rare skill, made possible only with the strongest of minds. Tia had been meditating for a long time before finally summoning the ice phoenix, and she had given life to the spiritual creature. Like a familiar, the ice phoenix went wherever Tia would, and owned a power much stronger than other spiritual creatures. But creatures born from projections were no match to real legendary beasts, and the ice phoenix was actually one of them. It was one that owned terrible power. Even a small feather from it would produce catastrophic energy. Tia put one hand on the top of the ice column. At her movement, a freezing draft suddenly flew from the ice column to form layers and curtains of frost and ice. In the blink of an eye, all the ice rushed towards the fiery dragon spirit like roaring sea waves. The fiery dragon spirit was the guardian of the crystal key. It would fulfill its duty, no matter the cost. Despite the stinging cold from the frost and ice, the dragon stood its ground. Opening its huge mouth, it breathed out a column of flame. The ice began to melt at the touch of the red, hot fire. The ice thinned with every second until the fiery dragon spirit rushed forward and broke it into pieces. It was an unyielding battle. As the fiery dragon spirit kept breathing out flames that melted the ice, Tia didn't stop for a single second in creating more curtains of frost and ice from the ice column. No side was willing to surrender. It's freezing. Zen felt his skin pebble from the frost. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, rubbing with his hands in an attempt to call for heat. There was a dramatic drop in the temperature. His eyes roamed his surroundings, and he saw nothing but whiteness. Even the breaths he huffed were foggy and streaked with ice. As his eyes fell on Tia, a strange feeling had befallen him. It was as if his every sense had blurred everything, and all he could see and hear was the woman in front of him. The fiery dragon spirit attacked relentlessly with its flame. The flickers lit up Tia's face. Shadows danced across her features, bathing her in an ethereal light. She was a vision that possessed Zen's senses. He traced the few wisps of hair that had dropped to her cheeks. She was now wearing an armor made of ice, wrapping around her body closely. The hard armor fit her so perfectly and followed the graceful lines of her figure. Zen looked at Tia's beautiful collarbones, down to the curve of her chest. She heaved from exertion, and Zen caught his own breath at the sight of her. For an unknown reason, his heartbeat started to chase one after the other. He heard the deep lungfuls of breath that he took, and he felt as if his own body was on fire despite the coldness of the ice surrounding him. Zen soon caught up to his own thoughts. He burned in confusion and embarrassment at the foreign feelings that had taken hold of him. The middle of a battle was the last place for his impulses. However, despite his struggle to hold on to his consciousness, he sank down into a trance once again. Tia felt Zen's eyes. His gaze was even hotter than the flames that threatened to reach her from the fiery dragon. She turned and cast him a look. Their eyes met, and a strange feeling slowly made its way to her. She stiffened at his gaze, as if a soft feather was caressing her skin. Her left hand remained on the top of the ice column to call out more frost from the ice phoenix feather, but her other hand, in a subconscious movement, found its way to her hair, tucking the strands behind her ears. Her skin was in contact with ice, but why was there a burning feeling inside her? Confusion flooded through her. Her instincts spoke to her in barely audible whispers. An unknown sensation was making its way through her skin. In the midst of a battle, the only heat she had felt was from her own body. Why? There was no explanation for the warmth in her flesh. She gulped in air, trying to cool the impulse, but it was in vain. Even the ice in the air could not smother the flames in her body. It was as if a primitive instinct was making itself known to her. She swallowed and licked her lips, and sweat broke out from her skin. For the first time in her life, she felt her composure shaken. That burning feeling both drew and scared her. Determined not to succumb to instinct, Tia tried her best to take control of her body and suppress the strange feelings in her. Ripping her eyes away from Zen, she put another hand on the top of the ice column and concentrated on holding the fiery dragon spirit back. But it seemed that Zen had a weaker will than Tia. Surrendering to the unknown feelings, he twisted his body and stretched out his hands to catch Tia's. His body thrummed with heat. He felt the moist film of sweat on Tia's hand, mirroring his own. The heat between them contrasted with the ice and frost that covered all around them. Tia struggled to retrieve her hand from Zen's grasp, but he responded by tightening his hold on her hand. She stopped struggling at the motion and conceded to the warmth of his fingers. His touch was a distraction. Tia found herself unable to completely focus on the use of the ice column. She looked at Zen, her eyes gleaming as the flames hid and brightened them at intervals. His own eyes saw through hers, and she gazed back, forgetting embarrassment, and forgetting even the situation they were in at the moment. Ow! The brief lapse had cost them dearly. A piercing roar was heard from the direction of the cave entrance, and the fiery dragon spirit let out a violent column of fire from its mouth to break all the curtains of frost and ice. It charged forward and finally broke into the cave. Oh ho! Tia screamed at the sudden change. It happened so quickly that she didn't have time to think what to do next. In her haste, she just kept pouring more and more of her life vitality into the ice column to reinforce its power. The ice column glared and gave off a much more intense coldness. Frightened and surprised by the terrible cold, the fiery dragon spirit retreated and withdrew from the cave. The ice thickened and the cave turned more and more cold, but the ice did nothing to sat the burning thirst in Zen's and Tia's bodies. They held each other's hand and clung to each other so closely, their fingers intertwining. Neither of them broke contact and stayed in their places, as if they had been frozen together by the ice in the cave. Neither Zen nor Tia had ever experienced such feelings before. They had no clue what to do under such a circumstance. They kept holding each other's hand, consoling themselves with the small relief they found at the touch of each other's skin. For now, it was the only way that worked. However, the small contact, far from satisfying, only intensified Zen's desire. Tia's skin exuded warmth, and filled him with a longing for what they were holding back. His eyes turned red for the burning impulse, and his mind was thrown in total havoc. He just wanted more. It was like a parched man's desire for more water after having a drop. He stepped closer to her and stretched another hand to her body. He wanted nothing more at that moment than to hold her into his arms and caress her with softness. Tia was fully aware of what Zen's intention was. She too felt the perils of the fire, but her body could not refuse him. At this moment, Zen heard a faint roar from the cyan dragon in his mind. His voice echoed repeatedly like a warning, and he felt a strong stabbing sensation. His head felt as if millions of needles were piercing at it. The harsh pain finally brought him to full consciousness. What's happening? Zen let go of Tia's hand as soon as he came around. He looked at her and then at the surroundings, his face twisted in confusion. His mind was still sluggish from what happened earlier, as if he was just waking up from hypnosis. With a grin, the cyan dragon replied, "I have warned you that the flood dragon is lascivious by nature. The space you are in at this moment is actually the flood dragon's sex organ. The yellow smog you saw earlier is a kind of natural aphrodisiac. It's very potent. The flood dragon's sex organ had a natural effect of arousing any species' desire. For some, it was a holy drug. In some martial arts practices, warriors would engage in a peculiar ritual where sexual intercourse with the opposite sex would play a key role in reinforcing their power. For those martial artists, the flood dragon's sex organ was the best ingredient to use for concocting aphrodisiacs. Although the huge flood dragon had been changed into a puppet, the part where its sex organ was housed was not damaged. The flood dragon spirit escaped all the way into this part of its body, and it was cut open by Tia afterwards. As a result, the yellow powder scattered into a mist. For its great aphrodisiac effect, a tiny portion of such yellow powder would be sold at an outrageous price in Central Region. Aphrodisiac, Zen exclaimed with wide eyes. I thought I was immune from any poison? He asked. It's an aphrodisiac, not poison. You cannot resist its effect, of course, the cyan dragon replied disinterestedly. Zen sighed in secret. He was fortunate that the cyan dragon had helped stop him from making a mistake. He could not have fought off the aphrodisiac on his own. Zen raised his head, finding Tia walking towards him in a dazed state. She stretched out both of her hands for him and her eyes were glazed over with a strange gleam. Zen brought a hand to his head when he realized what was happening. He was not the only one who was affected by the yellow powder. Tia had inhaled the mist as well, and from the looks of things, she must have taken more of it than him. Chapter 382, Angry Girl. Tia's eyes were so beautiful that it looked as if they were the clear waters of autumn. The mesmerizing colors swirled in her orbs, charming anyone who happened to gaze upon them. Even if Zen was in a fully conscious state and looked straight into her eyes, he would be too nervous to know what to do with his heart pounding strongly in his chest. If a fiery dragon weren't approaching, Zen would be able to fully appreciate her beauty, however, the fiery dragon could rush in any time. It wasn't a good moment to admire the woman. Hey, hey, to wake her up, Zen tried to shake Tia by the shoulders twice. However, Tia seemed to be in a fully unconscious state. All she could do was to barely use her left hand to transmit the life vitality to drive Phoenix Feather in the ice column with her right hand touching Zen's cheek gently. Her cold, wet, little hand caressed Zen's face, delivering the primitive desire in her heart. Slowly, Zen swallowed, still in a daze. Heaven knows why this happened. As he tried to say something to wake her up, she suddenly placed her fingers into his mouth. When Zen felt Tia's cold fingers and caught the cool, sweet smell of her sweat, his mind fell back into a disturbed state. As an inexperienced young man, Zen couldn't resist this kind of temptation, even in a conscious state. He couldn't help kissing her white, fine fingers that looked like thin roots of scallion. At this moment, the fiery dragon spirit at the mouth of the cave roared fiercely before rushing back into the cave. The rumbling roar abruptly woke Zen from the semi-conscious state. As a result of the urgent situation, he bit Tia's fingers on instinct. Because of the stabbing pain in her fingers, Tia recovered from the coma and withdrew her right hand in an instant. Simultaneously, a lot of life vitality released by her right hand made the fiery dragon step out of the cave once again. But her time awake was rather short. After the dragon was driven away, she turned to Zen and stared at him pointedly. Almost pushed to the point of craziness, Zen reluctantly said, "Oh, I'm going to deal with that dragon spirit myself." Then, he sidestepped Tia's outstretched hand and hit her hard on the back of her neck with his arm. Because of her body's overwhelming power, Zen had to use over 60% of his power just to stun her. Bang! After a dull thud, Tia fell into Zen's arms. As he embraced her soft body, he got a whiff of her delicate fragrance, leaving him a little reluctant to put her down. Afterward, he did put her on the ground. Since Tia lost control of the ice column in her comatose state, the fiery dragon came into view once again. At this moment, it looked down upon Zen. The dragon spirit was furious after a series of fierce attacks. It was no surprise that it would burn down the two people in front of it to ashes. I shouldn't have let her deal with that fiery dragon from the start. Given the situation, Zen was fairly annoyed. When the roaring dragon spirit lunged at Zen, it suddenly felt a sense of danger as if it had just encountered its most powerful enemy. Although it felt scared subconsciously, the fiery dragon was not very smart and didn't know what exactly was its source of fear. In its mind, the only thing it knew was that it had to guard the crystal key. If the two humans wanted to take it away, the dragon would kill them. Whoosh! At this moment, the black fire appearing between Zen's eyebrows was shot straight at the dragon in one go, looking like a flying black kingfisher. Although the black fire was much smaller than the dragon spirit, it successively swallowed the head, the body, and the tail of the huge creature until it was transformed into a single little black flame before disappearing completely into the fire. Windy sounds filled the air. Finally, it flew back to Zen's head. Suddenly, everything was quiet. Only white cold air was still emitted by the ice column with phoenix feather in it. Looking at the unconscious Tia in his arms, Zen found it hard to imagine that there was so much explosive force in her thin body. After coming out of the cave, Zen put her down and made her lean against the outside wall. While the crisis was temporarily resolved, Zen seemed to be lost, not knowing the way out. Hoping that the aphrodisiacs no longer had any effect on Tia after she woke up, he waited for her to regain consciousness. In order to avoid staring at Tia in a daze, Zen sat cross-legged beside her to meditate. Before she woke up, Zen adjusted his body and began practicing. Normally, Zen could enter the practice state instantly. Once he went into that kind of focused state, he often got lost in it, losing his sense of time as the days passed by quickly. But that day, Zen failed to concentrate. He hesitated to even open his eyes and glance at the girl in front of him. While Tia was unconscious, her ice armor did not disappear and its long phoenix tail wrapped around her legs, making her look like a phoenix that was curled up on the ground. With her eyes closed and eyelashes fluttering, she looked like she was dreaming about something. Although Zen was a man with great concentration and attention when he practiced, what happened beside the ice column that day almost made him fail to suppress his own excitement. The whole situation was torture. To fight his urges, Zen entered the cave and stepped out with the ice column on his shoulder. Sitting beside it, he was surrounded by layers of cold air and sank into practice state again with a calm heart. When he entered the mouth of the flood dragon with Tia, Zen did not get too many benefits. However, his cyan dragon and black fire became stronger since then. It showed to be a great result. Zen sank further into the practice state. As time went by, Zen kept his eyes closed as he turned the life vitality in his body at a constant rhythm. Suddenly, an extremely strong wind blew against Zen's face. When he opened his eyes, they were met by a palm hitting on his chest before Zen was heavily knocked against the wall. Standing there with long phoenix feathers scattered on the ground was Tia, gritting her teeth angrily. "What did you do to me just now?" Getting up from the ground, Zen rubbed on his chest. Thanks to his great body of spiritual weapon, the force of her palm was not too strong for him. Still, the incident left him rather upset. "What did I do? I didn't do anything to you. You should ask yourself that question." His return made Tia's face instantly turn red as a tomato. However, her color went back to normal when her body was enveloped by cold air. Although she was in a nearly unconscious state, she could still remember what happened just earlier. Although they did not do anything that might cross a moral line, as a girl who was always in an authoritative position, she couldn't easily accept the sort of thing that was rather shameful to speak aloud. "It seems I'll have to kill him." With her quick temper, Zen was most definitely on her kill list. Unfortunately, having sworn to the will of martial arts, she couldn't kill him. Puzzled at the moment, Tia put on a confused expression. If Fernandez saw such an expression on her face, he would certainly be surprised by the fact that this exceptionally vigorous girl, having shaken heaven and earth in the central region for many years, was suddenly in an uncharacteristically hesitant state. He wouldn't believe her confusion. Still, Tia failed to find a solution after pondering over it for a while. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said as coolly as she could, "You'd better forget about this whole thing. Give me the crystal key. We're going to get the treasure." As he handed the crystal stone to Tia, he mumbled with a twitch of his mouth, "Sure, I can forget it. But it looks like someone will remember it forever." "What did you just say?" Hearing his snide remark, Tia snapped her head back to glare at him. "No, I didn't say anything." Since it seemed unwise to try and argue with an angry woman who looked like a female lion ready to pounce, Zen merely shook his head with a seemingly innocent smile on his face. Chapter 383. The treasure box flew away. On Zen and Tia's way back, both of them went through the flood dragon's body without a word. Perhaps they felt a little embarrassed, or they might be angry at each other. The two of them finally arrived at the head of the flood dragon. Zen looked at its tightly shut mouth. Some runes were engraved on the rows of its huge teeth, which were interlaced with one another. The Blood Fiend Emperor must have made great changes to the dragon's teeth when the huge flood dragon puppet was made. However, How could they get out of it since the mouth of the flood dragon was closed? Even if they could go outside, most of the floating stones were probably destroyed. Flying was prohibited in the trial, and it was also hard to climb up the abyss wall. Just as Zen thought about it, Tia coldly looked at him and took out the crystal key without a word. She pointed it towards the wall beside her and pressed it hard onto the surface. The wall should be the rear part of the dragon's mouth. It had also been rebuilt, and lots of runes were engraved on it. Tia pressed the crystal key following the runes. When Tia did so, Zen felt the ground quake under his feet. He then heard the sound of a chain scratching stone outside. The flood dragon rose continuously. Tia actually had the flood dragon puppet under her control. Zen gawked at Tia in shock. This flood dragon puppet was the holy beast to protect Blood Fiend Emperor's sect. It's normal to control it with the crystal key, Tia said icily when she saw Zen's reaction. The flood dragon rose to the top as the chain scraped the wall on both sides of the abyss. Zen felt the dragon's body shake dramatically when it broke through the top gateway. The metallic sounds of chains breaking were heard. It turned out that Tia made the flood dragon puppet escape from its chains by controlling it. Suddenly, a huge flood dragon appeared in the sky above the cloud road. Meanwhile, Frank, Rocher, and the other disciples had passed the death road. They were far ahead of the other disciples. Now, they had entered the fourth part of the trial called the thrilling icy plain. In addition, they found another hidden trial there and obtained great rewards. All of them had gotten a lot, especially Rocher. He had even received a top-grade fairy weapon. Even Frank was a little envious of him. It seemed that luck had blessed Rocher more than him. Just after they had gotten the hidden rewards and resumed their path forward, they saw the huge flood dragon in the sky. Their eyes were a mixture of fright and surprise as they looked at each other. Why was there a huge flood dragon? Was it the flood dragon in the abyss? Did it swallow Zen and that mysterious disciple of the Cloud Hall? But why was it in the sky now? They had so many questions in their minds. After a while, Frank's lips curved into a cold smile. Let's go and move on. After the death road, the fourth part of the trial has also been different and there will be greater rewards waiting for us. He said. All the cultivators, who were on the Sea of Raging Fire, had started to enter the life road. Although many stone columns were broken, they successfully passed the Sea of Raging due to their good plan. The whole ordeal was extremely dangerous, but thankfully, no one died. Only one disciple got burned by the lava due to his carelessness. Just after the disciples passed the life road, they also saw the huge flood dragon in the sky. Oh my, what a huge dragon, one disciple shouted. Why is there a huge dragon inside the trial? What does the dragon want to do? Another disciple exclaimed. The disciples were thrilled as they watched the gigantic flood dragon up in the clouds. Fortunately, the huge creature was flying away from them. Otherwise, they would be in a great disaster. Outside the trial, Fernandez noticed that all the disciples had looked up. He adjusted the picture slab to watch the sky as well. The sight of the huge flood dragon in flight greeted the eyes of the sect leaders and Fernandez through the picture slab. This is a flood dragon. It is a mature one that has lived up to at least 50,000 years. Fernandez exclaimed in shock. He did not expect to see the flood dragon. He could tell its age, but he didn't see that the flood dragon was actually dead and was now only a puppet. A mature dragon that has lived 50,000 years. Why did it show up in the trial? A sect leader asked. The other sect leaders were also puzzled as well. The flood dragon was quite powerful and they could never defeat it at all, so the disciples in the trial didn't stand a chance. If the flood dragon wanted it, all the disciples could die in a second. The sect leaders and Fernandez probably did not know much about the trial. The whole trial was located in the legacies of a 6th grade sect. Thus, there were always some forbidden places and a holy beast to protect the sect. If a disciple trespassed in the forbidden place and released the holy beast, all the disciples in the trial would end up dead. Moreover, the holy beast could get out of the trial area and attack people outside. Thus, everyone was in danger. It's all right now as the flood dragon seems to have left. The sect leaders and Fernandez were greatly relieved when the flood dragon's figure disappeared through the distance. The flood dragon changed its direction every now and then under Tia's control. She then took her picture slab from her space bracelet. She could see the world outside the dragon body with the picture slab. Now they were above the Sea of Raging Fire. What are you looking for? Zen asked curiously. Tia only stared at Zen with hatred and did not respond. She mentally blamed Zen for her misfortunes as she had never been in such a low place since her birth, until now. However, there was nothing she could do to him. She instead concentrated on controlling the flood dragon puppet and carefully searched above the sea of raging fire. There it is! Tia suddenly exclaimed excitedly. They saw an island in the sea of raging fire. It was totally deserted and there wasn't any path to it. There was also a huge blood-red enchanted barrier outside it, which covered the whole island. Get down, Tia said, then she drove the flood dragon puppet down. When the flood dragon puppet got close to the blood-red enchanted barrier, a huge hole suddenly appeared in the barrier and the flood dragon puppet went inside. There were many buildings on the island. In front of the gate was a huge square. A huge black column stood in the center of the square. When Tia saw that Zen was confused probably by the presence of the black column, she drove the huge flood dragon's body and made it twist around the column. After many rounds, the head of the flood dragon finally landed on the ground and at the same time, its mouth opened. Zen carefully walked outside the flood dragon's body and raised his head to observe the column. If the huge flood dragon directly lands on the ground, it will need a large area. It is really smart to let the dragon's body twist around the column. It spares much room and is also convenient. How smart of the Blood Fiend Emperor, Zen thought. A large main hall stood behind the huge square. There was a tablet on the hall with 3 words, Blood Fiend Hall, inscribed on it. It looked like it was the original home of the Blood Fiend Emperor. Meanwhile, Tia also walked out of the dragon's body with the crystal key in her hand. She went to the platform at the center of the square first instead of the Blood Fiend Hall. The feather of the ice phoenix trailed on the ground behind her, and Zen followed. There was a crystal cube on the small platform that measured 2 feet long on each side. The inside of the cube seemed to lack a small piece that was needed to form a groove. Tia looked around the small platform and stared at Zen, then said, "You'd better get close to the platform." "Why?" Zen still asked even though he got closer to the platform. Tia didn't answer his question but put the crystal key into the groove of the cube instead. The moment Tia had inserted the key, the ground started to shake as if there was an earthquake. The whole square shook and trembled. Bang! At that moment, Zen saw that numerous light spots appeared. It was not from the sun, because there wasn't the sun in this space at all. The light spots on the square should be some special runes. Some of the runes were big and some of them were small. Some were shaped like the petals of a huge flower, while others were like rotating gears. Their shapes and sizes varied from one another. The one common thing about the runes was that they all started to rotate in the same direction. A slim, long, line of light appeared from each of the runes as they rotated at a certain speed. Then, the light flew in all directions. The lines looked like pieces of an arc that were meant to connect all the places inside the trial. What Zen didn't know was that one of the lines had flown to the hidden trial inside the Sea of Raging Fire, where Zen had obtained the silver treasure box. When the light line rushed toward the hidden trial, Lennon was down on the second platform. He was burned black all over. If one didn't look carefully, nobody could tell that it was a human. Meanwhile in the valley, all the other disciples from Cloud Hall had left. Lennon was the last one who jumped on the platform. He wanted to be well prepared for it, so he got delayed until the last minute. Just like Zen and Lewis, Lennon had also obtained the red treasure box on the first platform. It clearly cost him a great amount of life vitality and strength, so he chose to rest and recover first. He chose to meditate and recuperate until he was in the best condition since the hidden trial had no time limit. After quite a while, Lennon stood up and confidently jumped on the second platform. He mentally thought about the guy at the 3rd grade of the nature level who managed to get the silver box. He could easily do that since he was the top disciple of Cloud Hall. It would be ridiculous if he could not. He faced the flame and fireball, and tried his best with gritted teeth. In the end, he had survived. Lennon was completely exhausted after he had passed the trial on the second platform. He was severely burned. He successfully passed the trial because of the temptation of the blue box in front of him. As long as he had the blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon, he could obtain huge power and his body could recover in a short time. However, he was too badly hurt that he couldn't walk anymore. Thus, he crawled forward slowly. Even if the blue box was 10 feet away from him, it seemed so far away like the end of the world. Still, Lennon pushed himself. It doesn't matter. It will be worth it to obtain the blood vigor of the 9-headed dragon. He encouraged himself with gritted teeth. With great pain and a whole lot of effort, he had almost touched the blue treasure box. Just before he offered his hand, a light line suddenly shot towards the blue box and covered it. Then, the blue box turned around and raised itself. It flew away and followed the light line. What? It is flying away? Lennon asked himself in shock. Stunned and dumbfounded, he stared at the flying blue treasure box. Chapter 384, Heavenly Fruit Tree. After exerting so much energy to get here, Lennon never thought the blue treasure box would fly away before his yes. But it wasn't only the blue box that had suddenly vanished. All the crates, including the 2 golden treasure boxes and the black treasure box which were at the very top, were seen floating along the luminous beam at the same time. What is going on here? Lennon muttered to himself. Already too exhausted, he had no energy to shout abuse. But strange things such as this happened also in other places. In the 4th stage of Cloud Road, which was called Thrilling Icy Plain, Frank killed 3 devil icy snowmen. By executing them, he was finally able to mount a new stage. To kill the 3 snowmen, he not only relied on his excellent skills but also made use of the 3 talismans given by his father. These talismans were extremely valuable. Frank had been through several life and death situations, but he never brought out these amulets. This time, without hesitation, he took them out to conquer the 3 devil icy snowmen. He had no other choice. The rewards of the 4th stage were generous. He couldn't imagine how incredible the reward would be after he killed the 3 devil icy snowmen. When he walked up the steps made of ice blocks, he saw a steaming pool of blood. A blood pool, he whispered. He raised his head and looked at the wall. Frank read the words on the wall, Flood Dragon's Blood, and those words appeared as flying dragons and dancing phoenixes. It was Flood Dragon's blood. Frank was amazed. While the Flood Dragon's blood wasn't a patch of a genuine dragon's blood, it would still greatly benefit the warrior if he soaked himself in it for some time. So Frank felt it was worthwhile for him to use the 3 talismans. He strode towards the blood pool in high spirits. However, before he could approach the pool, a strong beam of light shone over the blood pool. Then, like the boxes, the blood pool appeared to travel along with the light until it vanished. What just happened? How did it fly away like that? A stupefied Frank asked. He wasn't the type of person to give up easily. Faced with the strange situation, he immediately used his spear to tap the ground, then flew toward the pool. However, just as he touched the ray of light, Frank was thrown off instantly and bounced before rolling down the steps made of ice blocks. Frank, what happened? Lois screamed. She looked extremely worried as she rushed toward Frank and bent down to check him. Then she helped him get up. In Thrilling Icy Plain, only Frank among the 5 was able to catch up with the 3 devil icy snowmen, who were all quite strong. It wasn't easy defeating them. To terminate the enemies, Frank needed his best skills and the 3 talismans, and still, it nearly cost him his life. But when he was about to succeed in getting the reward, the blood pool suddenly disappeared. What on earth is going on? Frank bellowed. He shook off Lois' hands and stared with disappointment at the place where the blood pool once was. He was reluctant to accept the fact about its disappearance. Roche, Patrick, and Louis also stared up at the sky with puzzled looks. There wasn't only one ray of light in the sky. There were as many as 7 or 8 rays of light interlacing in the air. They were all stumped about what was happening on Cloud Road. Besides Death Road, Sea of Raging Fire and Life Road, strange things similar to this also happened in all the other places. Even near the entrance of the Cloud Road, there were rays of light in its numerous roads. The Cloud Road was all abuzz because of those rays of light. It was impossible that Fernandez and the sect leaders didn't know about it. What on earth is going on? Why do strange things like this happen on Cloud Road? I have to report it to our superior. A shocked Fernandez said. Looking up at the rays of lights, Kenneth shook his head. He muttered, although Cloud Road is a broken world, its destruction will still take hundreds of thousands of years or even millions of years. It should be in the stability phase now, so why are there irregularities? Is it because of the Flood Dragon? The leader of the Auspice sect spoke up. It will make no sense to inform the superior. Our leader is practicing in a secluded place now. A worried Lady Long looked at the group. She said, but how about the disciples on Cloud Road? If they were killed by the rays of light, what should we do? Their lives are of great importance. Every 3 years, disciples who passed the Cloud Road's exams could enter Cloud Hall, which meant they automatically became the elite disciples of Cloud Hall. Once they were part of Cloud Hall, they would receive excellent training and education. If all these elite disciples died at this time, it would be a huge loss for Cloud Hall. We could only wait and see. I'm hoping that this isn't a bad omen. While Fernandez observed the rays of light at random through the picture slab, his face turned ghastly pale. Zen, who stood on the square, then realized why Tia had asked him to stand near the stone terrace. And he now also understood why there was one light spot after another on the square. These very light spots were what drew the treasured objects and treasure boxes on the cloud road through the light beams. Suddenly, they heard loud crashing sounds. Several treasure boxes pounded heavily on the square. The boxes! Zen cried out. His eyes widened in shock at the sight of them. Those red treasure boxes appeared before his eyes were precisely the ones hidden in the secret test. It would cost much to get any one of these boxes. But now, they had been put casually on the square. Again, the crashing sound jolted Zen. Before Zen could react, 6 or 7 blue boxes, 3 silver boxes, 2 golden boxes, and 1 black box came into view. He was too stunned over what he saw. His mouth hung open at the sight of so many treasure boxes. And the young disciple remained this way for quite a while until his face felt stiff and numb. Thanks to the silver box, Zen successfully obtained the manual of Malicious Wheel of Life and Death, left by the Blood Fiend Emperor. With this ability, Zen could become more powerful. Now, he wondered what the golden boxes and the black box contained. And the temptation to find out was so great. Have you ever gotten any of the boxes? Tia suddenly asked Zen. The question came out of nowhere as Zen continued to stare at the treasure boxes. Shrugging his shoulders, Zen nodded modestly. She glanced at the boxes again, and Tia found there were only 3 silver boxes remaining. But there were once 4 of them. Tia knitted her brows as she asked, "You did get 3 treasure boxes, right? Did you take the silver box?" There was a total of 5 silver treasure boxes in the valley. With the head of the Cloud Hall taking away one of them, there had still been 4 of them left. But now she could only see 3. It was obvious that someone else took one too, so Tia turned to Zen to ask. When Zen nodded, Tia was taken aback. She was well aware of how tough it was to get the silver box. Although she was capable of getting the box, too, Tia only tried doing it once. It was by accident at a later time when she found out the real secret behind the Cloud Road trial. Since then, she decided never to waste her time on the sea of raging fire. Because no matter how powerful she was, it was still impossible for her to get all the treasure boxes at the same time. It was more advisable for her to take the containers once by taking advantage of the crystal key left by the Blood Fiend Emperor. Once she took action, Tia had to do her best and get all the boxes in one go. When Zen, who believed that half of the boxes should be his, was walking closer to the containers and wanted to open one, Tia immediately stopped the disciple and dragged him back. All of a sudden, something round was falling down in front of them, and it hit the ground with a loud thud, enough to crack the blue bricks. That was the blood pool. Although the blood pool crashed heavily on the ground, the flood dragon's blood was viscous that none of it spattered out of the pool. The spurting blood beads would always bounce back in the pool. Well, what is it? Zen asked impatiently. Although unfamiliar with the blood pool, Zen knew this was extraordinary based on the scent of the blood in the pool. The pool is full of flood dragon's blood. You can soak yourself there later. For now, however, just stay here and don't move around because there will be other things dropping down, Tia told Zen. She felt discontented now, and one of her flaws was being inconsistent. Tia clearly disliked Zen, so it was a wonder that she had saved him just now. Why didn't she just let the blood pool kill him? This way, it wouldn't be her fault even if he was killed. And it would make no difference to her will of martial arts. However, it would be a waste to get rid of a talented fighter like Zen, who deserved high-grade training, Tia argued in her head. It would be a great loss for Cloud Hall if the disciple ended up being killed by the blood pool. This was the excellent excuse that came to Tia's mind. Suddenly, a big bang shook them. At this time, there was something else falling down from the sky. It was a fruit tree with 10 fruits. The size, color, and luster of each fruit were different from each other. And Tia couldn't hide her surprise and happiness when she saw this particular fruit tree. A heavenly fruit tree. Like most people, Tia had never seen a heavenly fruit tree before. They mostly only heard about it through legends. In the central region, nobody else would have ever seen this tree. It was at a secret auction in the central region where Tia had seen a heavenly fruit by chance. After being preserved for thousands of years, the fruit still remained plump and full. According to the auctioneer's description, it was the fruit of the heavenly fruit tree. Legend had it that there were only a total of 10 heavenly fruits in the world. Each time one of the 10 fruits was eaten, a new one would grow in the heavenly fruit tree. However, there would never be more than 10 fruits in the tree. Besides, each heavenly fruit functioned differently. And with the magical effects from every fruit, they became extremely precious. I did not expect that the heavenly fruit tree was planted in Cloud Road. And I didn't know that it once belonged to the Blood Fiend Emperor. It is beyond my expectation. It is really hard to imagine how powerful and strong his sect was. Tia muttered, there are 10 fruits in the heavenly fruit tree now. This means that the one at the secret auction was eaten by someone. Otherwise, there won't be 10 in the tree. It made Zen wonder why Tia was so excited and happy. But it was easy for him to assume how extraordinary the tree was. He believed that half of the treasure here was his. And since there were 10 fruits in the tree, he felt it was reasonable for him to eat 5 of them. It was truly an excellent deal. As Zen wondered how delicious the heavenly fruits would be, another shadow hovered in the sky. Then the shadow dropped straight down and was embedded on the ground. What fell was a grand sword that was 10 feet high. Chapter 385, Unexpected Breakthrough. Not far off, the gigantic sword was impaled deep into the ground. Although the exquisite blade was buried to the hilt, under the earth's surface the sword stood about 10 feet in all, and it was 1 foot wide. Aside from the dark coloring, there were ruby red lines along the length of the metal masterpiece. Even buried deeply in the ground, as it was, the giant sword was imposing and gave the impression that it was an aggressive beast of prey. Above ground, the hilt stood as tall as Zen, and seemed impossible for any man to wield. It's the sword of Blood Fiend Emperor, said Tia smoothly when she caught a glimpse of the sword. As far as she was concerned, this sword wasn't suitable for her, although it would be precious to most of the male warriors. Since the sword was buried at the Cloud Road's exit, Tia had seen it many times before, as any disciple who had already passed the test. Over the years, many members from Cloud Hall had unsuccessfully tried to pull the sword from the ground. Even the disciples who possessed Superman strength couldn't budge it. One of the many reasons no one had been able to retrieve the sword was its weight. Still, since disciples refining at the illuminating soul realm lifted things much heavier than the sword, there must be another reason no one had pulled it out. It turned out that an enchanted barrier safeguarded the blade, and unless it was shattered, no one would be able to get the sword. Because the burial place for the sword now was the heart of the plaza, the enchanted barrier protecting it vanished. I would think that the Blood Fiend Emperor was a human too, but how was he able to wield such a colossal sword? Questioned Zen as he stared at it curiously. Although Blood Fiend Emperor might found it not difficult to wield such a sword, it was still too long for any regular man. So, how could anyone battle enemies using it? It would be cumbersome, and when Zen visualized it, he was confused. A brooding expression crossed Tia's face, and she added, well, of course, it belonged to the Blood Fiend Emperor. But, why would you think he wielded it himself? Couldn't his sword spirit have been the one using it? After all, if his sword spirit was immense or if the Emperor infused the two, it would have been a tremendous help to him. Sword spirit, echoed Zen questioningly. What Tia was saying intrigued Zen. Since a puppet had ripped the streamer sword to pieces, Zen had been using the blood-drinking sword, which meant he didn't have a sword for his sword spirit, Lily. As Zen had been looking at the giant sword, he'd been contemplating giving it to Lily. However, it crossed his mind that even though Lily was slim and much taller than Tia, she might not be strong enough to wield it. Seeing Zen's eyes light up in interest, Tia smirked and proposed, let me guess, you have a sword spirit too. Sword intent and sword spirit were entirely different things, and even though Tia had seen Zen's sword intent previously, she found it hard to believe that anyone at the nature level could possess a sword spirit. Even before Tia finished speaking, a form emerged from within Zen's body. The humanoid was nearly as tall as Zen, and as slender as Tia, with pointy ears on her perfect face. Wow, I see you really have a sword spirit, exclaimed Tia in surprised excitement. Tia didn't possess such power or skill at grade 3 of nature level, so, she underestimated Zen, never believing he might have such things, even though Tia did know Zen was exceptionally talented in the martial arts. She also never considered that he could be concealing his actual abilities from others. He had a sword spirit that had already taken human form. Anger and jealousy were rising in Tia's heart at the sight of Zen's sword spirit, and she spat, you're disgusting. You shaped your sword spirit to look like a woman. Lily actually was a sexual woman. After all, she was a member of Demon Knight. The Demon Knight relished their sexuality and adopted many customs that humans enjoyed. She generally wore very few clothes, leaving most of her body exposed. Her waist was slim, her legs seemed to go on forever, being long, fit and alabaster. Covering her breasts was a fabric made of leaves. Tia held little respect for any female creature wearing clothes like that. Generally speaking, Tia knew that sword spirits altered themselves to suit their master's will. However, Tia was wrong about Zen. Zen's sword spirit was unlike any other, and he didn't manipulate her appearance at all. Unsure how to defend himself against her wrongful accusations, Zen scowled in frustration. Actually, Tia was a woman of considerable insight, and she was aware that the sword spirit had taken her form through special ways. She walked up to Lily, and carefully examined her perfect face before she smiled coldly, and said, "Your sword spirit is impressive. If you can use the sword spirit wielding sword skill well, I don't doubt that the giant sword of the Blood Fiend Emperor will be yours." Sword spirit wielding sword skill? What's that? Wondered Zen aloud. Don't act like a fool. You know darn well what it means. Your sword spirit is capable of fighting alongside you while wielding a sword, and you can manipulate her like a puppet. Snapped Tia, giving Zen an impatient look, as if he were a dolt. Many warriors took a great deal of time, and put in a lot of effort into cultivating their sword spirits so they could use them like a puppet in battles. However, although Zen had an interesting sword spirit, he seemed to know nothing about any of this. "Huh, do you mean like this?" With that, Zen tossed the blood-drinking sword to Lily. She caught the blade and suddenly changed from demure and quiet to an intimidating, aggressive-looking adversary. Until now, she had looked more like a delicate tree nymph, with no facial expression and being emotionless. However, as soon as she gripped the sword, her demeanor flipped, and she looked like a savage ready to slaughter anyone at Zen's order. She skillfully handled the blood-drinking sword. She made eye contact as she gracefully danced in a rehearsed routine. Her beautiful body and sexy clothes didn't detract her will or ability to slay an enemy, instead, her every action entranced a foe. Even women couldn't avoid her charm. Tia watched, in dumbfounded shock while Lily swayed rhythmically. Only a powerful, skillful sword master could see how unique Lily's skill was. Both Roche and Kenneth saw she was skilled in the arts of the sword dance. However, Tia was even better at assessing talent than either of them. As an influential figure in the central region, unbelievably, she couldn't find a single flaw in her dance. If Tia was a warrior who wielded a sword, she would definitely ask Zen to teach her to dance like that. "Is this what you meant by sword spirit wielding sword skill?" questioned Zen as he stared at Tia. Staring back into Zen's eyes, Tia wondered if Zen deliberately ordered Lily to dance in such a seductive way. She paused momentarily and then replied, "Yes, it is. However, before you are able to brandish this giant sword, you will need to transfer some of your sword spirit into it. That way, you can use it as much as you like." Zen focused, directing his mind to a singular thought, and as he did this, some red dots sparkled on Lily's body. He moved the sparkles from her to the giant sword. Lily's body seemed paler, as the red rays shot from the blade's intricate lines. "Rise," ordered Zen. Lily jumped and landed lithely on the hilt of the giant sword. Her long, pale hands pushed the grip, and the blade moved. She drew the sword, effortlessly. Although the blade appeared to be too long for Lily, she balanced it comfortably, handling the sword as though it were created for her from the very beginning. After she swung the sword, she thrust it back in the ground, and without hesitating, she became countless spots of sword spirit before she returned to Zen's body. "I want the giant sword," stated Zen. Apparently satisfied with the sword, Zen smiled. "Then, it is yours," replied Tia smoothly. She actually wanted Zen to have the sword. If his sword spirit was capable of wielding this sword, it could help Zen reach a higher martial arts level. Just then, the sky's light dimmed, blocked by something falling to the earth. Masses of meteorites and dark steels which were used to refine weapons were dropping from the air. Eventually, a verdant garden revealed itself, guided by the light. When the garden landed in a corner, Tia raised her eyebrow and hurried to it. Effective herbs required a very long time to grow, and no one felt obliged to tend to them since the demise of the Blood Fiend Emperor. Thus, thousands of years had passed while the herbs grew, untended. They would be priceless on the market as long as they were intact with the changeable and severe weather. "This is the herbal garden." Before Zen finished his sentence, Tia turned, grabbed hold of Zen's hand, led him to the exit and threw him, muttering, "The herbal garden will never be yours. Wash up." Zen felt his body lift off the ground, and he sailed through the air. After the unusual flight, he landed in the dragon blood pool, and within a few seconds, Zen felt his skin burning. He hadn't expected the dragon blood to be that hot. Since Zen's body was designed for weapon refinery, he could endure regular fire, easily. However, blood of a dragon was far hotter than any regular fire. The experience was extremely strange for Zen. However, the strange feeling only lasted a short time. As his body adjusted to the high temperature, he felt more comfortable, and it felt more like he were taking a hot spring bath. All over him, Zen's pores opened as he soaked in the blood bath. As he soaked, he absorbed the nutrients contained in it. Relaxing, his eyes closed and he started to practice his martial arts. However, his mind opened, as he meditated. Seeing Zen's eyes closed, Tia scowled as she began to gather herbs. To recover her strength fully, she still needed several essential herbs, and she hoped to find them amongst the herbs in the garden. Approximately an hour later, Zen's eyes shot open, and his lower abdomen shook slightly. Life vitality flowed through him. Soaking in the dragon blood bath had inadvertently led to a breakthrough. Chapter 386, An Exchange of Favors. Though Zen had made rapid progress to his refinement, it was still not enough. He knew that his progress was still far from those members of the noble clans in the eastern region. Took for example his friend, Roger. Zen first met Roger while he was completing a task that the Cloud sect had assigned to him. Roger was only at grade 1 of nature level back then. But when Zen had seen Roger again after a few months, he could tell that Roger had quickly progressed to grade 5. It had amused Zen how much Roger improved in a short period of time. However, it was common knowledge that some martial arts cultivators could use some pills to speed up their progress. When they did, their cultivation base would normally be unstable. It was like hastening the baking of a pastry. The outside looked good, but the inside would turn out to be half-baked. But some cultivators would opt to pay the price of unstable cultivation just to speed up their progress. However, a half-baked cultivation base would often have a bad effect on their further progress. Nonetheless, it was the pride and reputation these cultivators were after. Despite having an unstable cultivation base, once a cultivator reached the illuminating soul realm, he would immediately become a respected figure in the eastern region. This was enough for many cultivators. Without a stable cultivation base, progressing from illuminating soul realm to the next level would be like a thread passing through a needle hole. Hence, some cultivators would forget about progressing from illuminating soul realm to internal elixir realm and other higher stages of martial refinement. But Zen wasn't like everyone else. He had a very solid cultivation base. Sometimes, he would even restrain himself from leveling up until his body made a breakthrough on its own. This was the same as men's nocturnal emission, which happened naturally after a long period of accumulation. Inside the pond, Zen had finally stabilized his new breakthrough. But instead of relaxing, he continued to sit in a lotus position and do his breathing exercises. He felt that staying in that environment for a longer period would be helpful to his body. Although it wasn't a real dragon, the flood dragon's blood contained so much strong and pure power. However, due to Zen's low refining level, he could only absorb a limited amount of that power. The flood dragon's blood was a priceless treasure even for a grade 6 sect, so it was only fitting that it was stored in this elegant pond. The flood dragon's blood seemed endless in this pond, so even if Zen stayed in the pond much longer, the blood wouldn't dry out. While he was meditating, Zen heard an embarrassed titter coming from his mind. It was from the cyan dragon. The flood dragon spirit that the cyan dragon had absorbed had nourished him and made his waking hours longer. Zen tried to ignore him. He focused his mind on meditating. However, the cyan dragon grew more irritating. So, Zen was left with no choice but to acknowledge it. "What do you want?" asked Zen. "Finally, I thought you would seriously ignore me. I was just wondering, can I absorb the rest of flood dragon blood?" The cyan dragon asked with an awkward smile. Zen could not help but roll his eyes. The cyan dragon had been deliberately ordering Zen to get whatever he wanted in the past. It wasn't the type to ask or wonder what he could or could not get. But this time, to Zen's surprise, the cyan dragon was asking him a favor. Zen thought that maybe the cyan dragon was embarrassed to ask for more because he just got his fair share of the flood dragon spirit. But despite the plea from the cyan dragon, Zen could not immediately answer because the flood dragon blood didn't solely belong to him. But he also saw this as an opportunity to get something in return from the cyan dragon. He pretended to think, then sighed, "As much as I want to, I can't. You know Tia owns half of the flood dragon blood. It's up to her who to use her share of it." But the cyan dragon wasn't born yesterday. He told Zen, "Well, you just got played by that girl. She's a smart aleck, you know. The herbs in the herbal garden are of greater value than this pond of blood. Say, that 80,000-year-old lunar anesthesia herb alone is equal to this pond full of blood. I don't think she would need her share of the flood dragon blood. Come on, think about it. Obviously, the cyan dragon had a wide knowledge of everything. He knew exactly the value of things and wouldn't be fooled by anyone, even Zen. Zen could also estimate the value of those herbs just by scanning them with his soul. Both the lunar anesthesia herb and the flood dragon blood were valuable to Zen, but not to the cyan dragon. Even the valuable heavenly fruit tree that Zen would die to have could only be described as not bad by the cyan dragon. If it wasn't for this awkward situation, the cyan dragon would never take the flood dragon blood seriously. But because of the experiences that put him in such occasion, he had no other choice but to consume the flood dragon blood in order to regain his strength. But still, she has the right to her share. And if I take it all by myself, I'm afraid she won't let me see another day, Zen insisted stubbornly as sly guilt flashed in his eyes. The cyan dragon fell silent for a while. He was assessing the situation and finding ways to make Zen agree to his bidding. Suddenly, he said, "Okay, tell me what you want. I can do anything under my power. Maybe, I can teach you something useful. Say, our cultivation method." "Sounds good, the cyan dragon said. Sensing that he had aroused Zen's attention, he continued, "However, I must warn you. The cultivation methods of dragons like me aren't suitable for you because your body is still very weak. Even if I teach you some of our cultivation methods, you won't be able to use them with your current strength." Zen laughed. He knew that the cyan dragon had sensed his eagerness to learn any new cultivation method, but he had to act like he was not that interested. "Hey, I never asked for anything in return. Besides, I have never agreed to give you Tia's share. But since you're offering, who am I to resist? I'll accept it with pleasure," Zen said, laughing. "You're a cunning but smart boy. Fine, I'll teach you a set of rune-making methods. It's one of the best attainments we dragons have acquired in runic learning," the cyan dragon said proudly. He had long planned to teach Zen something useful. Imparting even a little part of his broad knowledge to Zen would benefit the latter a lot. But he had held the thought for a while, since Zen's low refining stage would limit his ability to grasp or exert the cyan dragon's inheritance. But seeing the improvement in Zen's strength and his stable cultivation base, he finally decided to teach Zen the methods of writing runes. After all, runes were widely used in this world and could be applied to many different fields. If Zen would become a runic expert, he could deal with many troublesome situations without the help of the cyan dragon. Runes took many forms and could be used for different things. For example, a magic array expert was a special type of runic experts in the eastern region. A large array was usually made of hundreds or thousands of runes, and it required special runes to build magic arrays. Runes could also be used in refining weapons. For example, if a weapon refiner could use some special runes while refining a weapon, it could increase the success rate of the refinement and the weapon's grade would also improve. The same process was used for refining pills. Upon hearing the cyan dragon's offer, Zen could not help but smile. It could be recalled that he had earned his money mostly by selling his heavenly essence. He had thought about becoming a weapon refiner by right of his heavenly essence but had only learned the way of smelting. He hadn't even once tried the most important part of refining a weapon. But if the cyan dragon could teach him the method of using runes, it would be much easier for Zen to master weapon refining. Without hesitating, he immediately answered, "Hey, I like that idea. That's exactly what I have in mind right now. If you can really teach me, you can absorb as much flood dragon blood as you want. As for me, I've absorbed what I needed, so it's useless for me now." "You're a tricky mongrel." The cyan dragon felt annoyed but had to accept that he was tricked by Zen. Meanwhile, in the herbal garden, Tia was patiently counting and recording all the herbs. Each herb required a specific method of handling, otherwise, they would immediately wither once touched. For example, the rhizome herb called nurturing primrose would produce the sound of a crying baby when casually touched, then eventually withered in one breath and lost its value. The fiery dragon saliva, on the other hand, contained a fiery toxin that would infect people when they touched the plant. Hence, Tia dealt with all the herbs accordingly. As she was carefully dealing with the herbs, the thought of Zen bathing in the pond came to her mind. She blushed momentarily but shrugged the indecent thought off her mind. She focused on the idea on her mind that some herbs in the garden could be added to the flood dragon blood that would purify Zen's life vitality and refresh his body. Though she envied Zen's current status, she wasn't a stingy person. She believed that Zen held great potential for the Cloud Hall. She wouldn't want to waste such a great talent. As she had seen it, Zen could muster a sword spirit that had a real shape when he was still in a low refining level. And that proved that he could be a promising talent to the Cloud Hall. With excitement, she dug up those herbs and headed towards the blood pond. She couldn't keep her mind off the thought of seeing Zen half naked in the pond. She blushed again, and despite the attempt to shrug it off her mind, she couldn't. As she approached the pond, an unexpected view greeted her. She froze in stunned silence. Instead of a half-naked Zen, she saw a completely empty pond. "Where's the flood dragon blood?" she asked in astonishment. She was dumbfounded to see that all the flood dragon flood had disappeared after Zen stayed in it for some time. How could that be possible? The flood dragon blood was a priceless treasure. It would be extremely improbable for an ordinary human to absorb all the energy in its blood. In fact, it would be a great achievement for an ordinary person to even manage to absorb several drops of the blood at once. Tia could still remember leaving the pond full just some moments ago, only to come back to nothing. Absorbing that amount of flood dragon blood would cause a person to suffer a violent death. A normal body would not be able to contain the huge power in the flood dragon blood, thus it would explode. It was like filling up a small bag with water. The bag would expand, but it could only take so much water that it would eventually explode once it reached its limit. This would be the same fate even for a powerful cultivator like Tia. The flood dragon blood. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help it. I absorbed all of it while you were gone," Zen replied in an apologetic tone. He couldn't tell Tia what really happened. He also felt somehow guilty about giving all the flood dragon blood to the cyan dragon without letting her know first. "What did you say? You absorbed all of it? That's absurd." Tia's eyes widened in astonishment as she stared at Zen. She couldn't imagine that Zen managed to consume so much flood dragon blood and still be here talking to her as if nothing had happened. Nonetheless, she knew Zen hadn't left the pond and there was no way he could move the blood somewhere else. Thus, even though it was hard to believe, she knew that Zen wasn't lying about absorbing all the flood dragon's blood. "Goodness, that's a pond full of flood dragon blood," Tia said in dismay as she approached Zen. Her face darkened a little in disappointment. It might be true that the flood dragon blood was no use for her, but it could serve as a reward for the disciples in Cloud Hall. "Didn't we make an agreement that we will share all of these treasures? Now, since you consumed the flood dragon blood all by yourself, I don't see a need for me to share these treasure chests with you now." Tia spat angrily as she glanced at the treasure chests on the ground. Since there was no way to return the flood dragon's blood, she might as well play with Zen a little. "Hey, that's unreasonable," Zen argued back. "You've taken all the herbs from the garden. The lunar anesthesia herb alone is more valuable than the pond of blood. Do you seriously think you can trick me? You're haggling like a woman. Or maybe, I should also own half of that giant sword of Blood Fiend Emperor. Do you want it that way?" Tia rebutted. She liked it when Zen was getting annoyed. They had quite a quarrel over the rest of the precious inheritances of the Grade 6 sect. Although Tia was just playing around, she liked the idea of getting square with Zen after he had selfishly consumed all that flood dragon blood. Zen, on the other hand, wouldn't agree on anything that Tia offered. And after failing to reach an agreement, they both agreed to open the treasure chests first. Once they saw what was inside each box and how one could use the item, then they could determine how to divide the treasures. Chapter 387, The Unboxing of Surprises. Tia and Zen had reached a consensus that both of them would get an equal share of everything they would get. When they decided to open each box, they went for the red treasure boxes first. Each red treasure box contained a black item, the soul essence refined from the essence of the dark devil phantom. It could either be traded at a decent price or used to toughen up a soul without any side effects. Zen got 7 of those red treasure boxes. After putting away their share of red treasure boxes, they opened the blue treasure boxes next. Unlike the red treasure boxes, the blue ones contained more precious treasures, the blood vigor of 9-headed dragons. Out of the 6 blue treasure boxes, Zen got 3. Looking at his stack of red and blue treasure boxes, Zen was filled with excitement. He couldn't wait to see what the other boxes held and how many he could get. He then stared at Tia without saying a word. "What are you staring at?" Tia questioned angrily. She was ill-tempered and sitting beside the half-naked Zen who kept on staring at her was a bit overwhelming. But she had to remain focused. Although she had promised to equally share the treasures with him, it was just normal for her to feel great regret. If it was any other disciple, Zen wouldn't get half of everything. Fortunately, Tia was more open-minded in practicing martial arts. She could look beyond these treasures for the greater good of the Cloud Hall. Besides, for Tia, Zen would be the most priceless treasure that the Cloud Hall could have. Finally, Zen said while his eyes were still fixed on Tia, "With all these treasures, I'm afraid my space ring would run out of space." He waved his hand helplessly at Tia. The space ring that Zen was using was still the original one. Although Evil Land's space ring didn't have a high capacity, its space had been enough for Zen. But with all the treasures he had now, it would be hard for him to keep them all in his space ring. Thwip! A streak of silver light flickered in front of Zen. It was from the space ring that Tia tossed at him. Zen caught it and looked at it for some while. He was stunned when he realized the high capacity of Tia's space ring. As Zen assessed, the space in that space ring might be enough to hold half of an island. The space ring was quite valuable, and it was specially designed for women. Zen noted that the outer surface of this space ring was designed with a little lifelike phoenix made of heptal gold. "Thank you, I'll put up with this space ring for the time being," Zen said smilingly as he admired the space ring that Tia lent to him. He started to put his share into the space ring. After Tia tossed the space ring to Zen, her face looked colder. Zen's remarks appeared to be ungrateful for Tia. She hissed to herself, "This jerk is really ungrateful. The more he gets, the more he wants." She shrugged off her annoyance and proceeded with the task at hand. After equally allocating the red and blue treasure boxes, Tia moved on to the 3 silver treasure boxes that she had obtained. She could feel her hands were getting cold. These silver boxes might contain more valuable treasures. She carefully opened each silver box, holding her breath for the wonder awaiting them. As expected, the silver treasure boxes indeed contained far more valuable items. Inside each box was a soul jade slip with a record of the Blood Fiend Emperor's previous cultivation methods. Previously, Zen had got the Blood Fiend Emperor's unique skill known as Malicious Wheel of Life and Death. Now, he didn't desire to know more about the cultivation methods recorded on the remaining 3 soul jade slips. After all, Zen knew that it would be difficult for him to assimilate if he learned too many cultivation methods at the same time. Hence, Zen gave the 3 soul jade slips to Tia, and this gesture satisfied her a lot. However, Tia wouldn't practice the cultivation methods on the Blood Fiend Emperor's 3 secret books either. Though it was no use to her, she was sure that the elders of the Cloud Hall would make every effort to get these secret books if they were used as rewards and prizes. The Cloud Hall had 5 grade 2 sects affiliated to it. Thus, it was arduous and difficult to manage all these sects well. If the Cloud Hall could offer such precious rewards, each sect would try to be the best, making the work easier for Cloud Hall. Therefore, pays and rewards should be given to the top elders, stewards, and disciples. After Tia put all the silver treasure boxes into her space ring, she moved on to the gold treasure boxes with greater anticipation. As Tia opened one of the gold treasure boxes, she saw a defective stone carving. She didn't bother with it first, but as she looked closely, her eyes suddenly gleamed. Like Tia, Zen was also completely attracted to the golden stone carving even though it was very small. The feelings that overwhelmed him at that moment were somewhat like the feelings that he had when he saw the Sun Moon Stars picture for the first time. "Hey, smart guy, so, you figured this out again?" Tia asked sarcastically as she gave Zen a hard look. This time, she really didn't believe that Zen could easily see what the stone carving revealed, especially that it was his first time seeing it. The gold stone carving contained space laws. A wise disciple would be able to see through and comprehend some space laws when he mediated beside the stone carving in the Sumeru space of Cloud Hall. Tia was able to understand the space laws immediately upon seeing the little stone carving. The stone carving inside the Cloud Hall was defective as well. However, it was cyan blue, and its space laws were nothing compared to the golden stone carving in front of her. In general, only those people who understood some space laws could sense and experience how powerful and awesome the space laws of this stone carving were. A mediocre disciple would mistake such a stone carving as an ordinary stone, especially if it was the first time that he encountered it. He would even discard it immediately after he picked the stone carving up. But Tia saw how differently Zen was gazing at the stone carving. He looked at it as if he knew what this kind of stone was and seemed to be contemplating this stone carving very attentively. However, Tia had enough of Zen's showy attitude that she sneered at his feigned observation of the stone carving and didn't believe that he could actually comprehend space laws. In view of the current level that Zen had reached, Tia thought it was rather incredible that he cultivated the consummate sword intent and could turn his sword spirit into human shape. Apart from this, Tia had also felt that Zen's soul was far more powerful than those of others who were at the same level as him. But even so, there was no way for Zen to truly see through the space laws that easily. At first, Tia looked at Zen with a disdainful look. But her ridicule was replaced by great astonishment when she realized what was actually happening. For her, it was unbelievable. After stepping onto the death road, Zen had never shown his power of space. He had only used that power once when he tried to get the silver treasure box. It was only Fernandez and several sect heads who had witnessed Zen's application of the power through the picture slab. However, Tia didn't know that until now. As the light on the stone carving became dimmer, she realized that Zen had comprehended the power of space reflected from the stone carving and was really contemplating the space laws. Like the cyan blue stone carving inside the Cloud Hall, the power of space contained in this type of stone carvings was not infinite. When the cyan blue stone carving was rich in the power of space, it would emit a faint light. But the light would become dimmer once the power was mediated by an elder. Upon its depletion, the power of space would be restored naturally by the stone carving. But only after the restoration could one really proceed with the mediation. This was just the reason why strict time limits were set upon contemplating on stone carving in the Cloud Hall. These time limits were respected by everyone who contemplated the stone carving. The same phenomenon was true for the defective gold carving. In the course of Zen's mediation, the golden light over the stone carving was dispersing. This only meant that Zen had comprehended some of the space laws and the power of space had been constantly consumed. At first, Tia had intended to satirize Zen. But at that moment, Tia was only amazed by what Zen was doing. She had forgotten about satirizing Zen. Right now, she became more impressed by Zen's talent. Deep in her mind, she was re-evaluating the potential of this young guy. When she first met Zen, Tia merely perceived him as top talent from a grade 2 sect. Although he looked as though he only had relatively mediocre accomplishments in cultivation, he exhibited fairly great potential for future development. After all, everyone who was eligible to step onto the death road was among those with great potential. Among several people who had started their journey on the death road, Frank was the most outstanding. Apart from him, all others such as Roche, Patrick, Lewis, and Lois could not be underrated either. But after Zen showed his heavenly ogre fist and the perfect sword intent, Tia assessed that Zen could outperform Frank. All the power that Zen had was totally beyond Tia's imagination. Now that Zen could even comprehend the power of space, Tia believed that even the top disciples from the most powerful grade 5 sects would be no match for Zen. In Tia's book, there were very few talented figures in the eastern region. And in the past years, no disciple there had been found to be especially gifted or outstanding. So, how could such an extraordinary person like Zen be suddenly cultivated in a grade 2 sect? This puzzled Tia a lot. In the assessment of Cloud Hall, the disciples in the eastern region lagged far behind those in the central region in terms of inheritance of cultivation methods and distribution of resources. It was like participating in a long-distance race where one had already failed at the starting point. The eastern region had nothing to brag about with other regions. Now, I remember, the fiery dragon spirit wasn't killed by me. But why? Tia's eyes widened as she realized that she had overlooked that. Earlier when she was fighting against the fiery dragon spirit, Tia mistakenly took some overpowering drug. As a result, she was not quite conscious and thus unable to resist attacks of the fiery dragon spirit. She didn't know what happened next after she lost her consciousness. When she came back to her senses, the fiery dragon spirit was already dead and only Zen was with her. Now that she remembered it wasn't her that killed the fiery dragon spirit, it was Zen after all. Over so many years, Tia had never been so intimate to any man. Zen was the only man that she had ever been physically attached to. She couldn't help but blush every time when she remembered her moments with Zen. But she didn't want him to know, so she tried to forget those times. Hence, she unconsciously overlooked all about the death of that fiery dragon spirit. Remembering those times, Tia's face became red and she felt embarrassed to look into Zen's eyes. She took a deep breath to regain control over her body. Tia still had a doubt about the death of the fiery dragon spirit. She thought that no matter how mighty Zen was, he couldn't have been able to confront and defeat the huge fiery dragon spirit with his current cultivation level. But now that the fiery dragon spirit was dead, was it really killed by Zen? How was that even possible? Tia knew that Zen wouldn't reveal the truth unless she asked him. But whatever it was, Tia was sure that there was still something she didn't know about Zen. This intrigued her so much that she wanted to get to know him better. This young guy will surely enjoy great fame in the world in the future. Tia mumbled to herself in a daze as she stared at Zen, who was still seriously contemplating the golden stone carving. After quite a while, the light over the stone carving was getting dimmer until it finally completely vanished. It left Zen's eyes stained with a tinge of the golden color. Apparently, he had substantially comprehended the space laws. Zen slowly turned his eyes away from the golden stone carving to Tia. He subtly smiled and spoke to Tia. "What did you say?" To sneer at Zen, Tia would have said, "You've figured out what it is again." However, what Zen had just accomplished slapped Tia on the face. Tia could do nothing but snort coldly as a response to Zen's question. By that moment, it had become useless and meaningless for her to further dispute over Zen's strength. Without formally replying to Zen, she shifted her attention to another gold treasure box and opened it. When she opened the gold treasure box, she found an array pattern which was for protecting the grade 6 sect. It was useless for Zen but would be of great value for Tia. With this array pattern, the Cloud Hall would become more powerful in defending against its enemies. But it would be uneasy to deploy an array to protect the Cloud Hall. Tia showed it to Zen and told him what it was used for. Zen raised no objection to Tia's possession of this array pattern. Although it was helpful for protecting a sect, it was of no value for him. By now, there was only the final unopened box, the black treasure box. With all the wonders they had seen so far, Tia's hand was still shaking. The gold treasure boxes proved to have far more valuable items than those of the first boxes they had opened. Now that they were moving on to their last box, a black treasure box, Tia's expectation became higher. What could be more valuable than those in the gold treasure boxes? Tia examined the box first. On the outside, this black treasure box looked a little weird. All other treasure boxes were either red, blue, white, or gold. Only this one was colored black. If there were some gears or magical spells inside the treasure box set by the Emperor himself, both Tia and Zen would be in danger. But as Tia carefully pulled the lid of the black treasure box, they saw a swarthy oil lamp inside. Tia pulled it out and looked at it closely. It looked nothing special, but was like the small oil lamps used by ordinary families. Zen also looked at it closely while Tia was holding it. He was still baffled when he saw that Tia's eyes became wide in astonishment again. This is the enchanted lamp from the Celestial Tomb. Chapter 388. The lighting of the lamps. Zen wasn't sure what was special about that lamp, but Tia was dumbstruck at the sight of it. It made the other things left Blood Fiend Emperor pale by comparison. Heavenly Fruit Tree and Flood Dragon Blood both belong to the inheritance of the Grade 6 sect, which could certainly help the Cloud Hall reach a new level. But they were not a must at present because the Cloud Hall, as a Grade 4 sect, was developing rapidly and leaving behind those at the same grade. If Tia could succeed in improving her strength, it was highly possible that the Cloud Hall would rank as Grade 5 soon. This enchanted lamp, however, was different. There was a celestial tomb in the chaotic ocean of stars which was thousands of miles away from Central Region. The celestial tomb was literally the tomb of a celestial being. But even the celestial beings were not immortal. It seemed that their infinite life expectancy also had an end. That was the incontestable power of time. When an immortal reached his 10,000 or even tens of thousands of years old, there would be some irreversible and noticeable changes in their bodies: filthy clothing, falling hair, sweating armpit, stinky body, and restless mind. Once the immortal reached the restless mind stage, he would become mortal and die. These 5 stages were so-called 5 aging processes of the celestial beings. It was said that this tomb was owned by Mist, a celestial being from the mundane world. At the end of his very long life, probably for tens of thousands of years after he became immortal, he went back to his homeland once he reached restless mind, the last stage before vanishing permanently. 100 years after his return, he built a celestial mausoleum at the bottom of the chaotic ocean of stars and buried himself in it, giving it the name Celestial Tomb of Mist. As a deadly attraction, the tomb attracted many cultivators who were willing to risk their lives. Unfortunately, many of them died trying to get in there. The chaotic ocean of stars had long been a forbidden area for human beings, and being guarded by the celestial beings, it became more dangerous than ever. So the tomb was not accessible for everyone. For the past tens of thousands of years, nobody had harvested anything from the Celestial Tomb of Mist. No one ever succeeded in breaking into it, and those who attempted lost their lives. As a result, people chose to stay away from the Celestial Tomb, and thus the Celestial Tomb of Mist finally rested in peace. Nevertheless, 2,000 years ago, several enchanted lamps appeared in the central region. They looked like ordinary oil lamps, except that the name of Mist was carved at the bottom of each lamp. For this reason, the rumors went around. Some believed that these lamps were guarding the celestial tomb of Mist. If the 9 lamps were lit up, they would create a portal to the tomb. The top cultivators managed to find 6 of them, which were now in the possession of some high-grade sects. To get into the tomb, they agreed to light the lamp at the same time. But with only 6 lamps in their possession, success was just wishful thinking. The rest of the lamps were nowhere to be found, although they were possibly in the possession of some unknown masters. It was almost an impossible mission to locate the 3 little lamps in the vast central region, so the sects in power came up with a solution: lantern lighting festival. For common people, it was a festival where they lit the lanterns and released them into the sky. Children loved this day because they could enjoy all kinds of beautiful lanterns and have fun on the streets. But for the masters in the central region, it was the time to light up the enchanted lamp. They made an announcement to the world, hoping that everyone who owned one or several of these lamps could light it at the same time during the lantern lighting festival. At the edge of each lamp, there were some small marks, and when other lamps lit up, the corresponding number of marks would glow. 200 years ago, only 6 marks glowed at each year's event, which meant that only 6 enchanted lamps were found. However, 150 years ago, something unusual happened: an extra mark glowed. Someone had found the 7th lamp and was ready to break into the celestial tomb. If the owner had not dreamt about it, he would not even dare to light it up. Another 30 years had passed since the 7th lamp was lit up. And now another lamp was lit up. It was the 8th lamp. The central region was thrilled at the news. Every cultivator and sect made all the efforts to ensure that they were ready for the last one, which might open the path to celestial tomb of Mist. Some believed that it would happen in the next 3 years after the 8th lamp was lit up. But 30 years had already passed since the 8th lamp, but there wasn't a sign. Surprisingly, the last lamp the central region has been waiting for was in the hand of Blood Fiend Emperor. If I hadn't got the inheritance of Blood Fiend Emperor, their wish would never come true, Tia concluded calmly. Listening to Tia's story about the lamp, Zen sighed. He could not imagine that the celestial tomb was that amazing and attractive. Was it related to that fairy palace? The fairy palace was beautiful, but it was no use for Zen because he was only a temporary owner and could not make use of anything in it. This enchanted lamp, Zen pointed at the oil lamp. It's mine, Tia stated. Noticing the dissatisfaction in Zen, she added, you belong to the Cloud Hall anyway. If there's a chance to explore the tomb, I will certainly take you with me. Nonsense. Are you really from the Cloud Hall? Can you prove that? You haven't told me anything about your identity yet. Zen was more convinced of the importance of the enchanted lamp now, so he would not easily give up. Tia stared at him. Do I look like a bad person? You made up your background and changed your appearance to sneak into Cloud Road, aiming for the inheritance of Blood Fiend Emperor. What do you think? Zen grinned. Finding it hard to convince Zen, Tia threw a token to him. This is my communication token. You can talk to me through it in Cloud Hall. The Cloud Hall token. The token was white and bright as snow with several clouds carved in the back. In the middle of the token, there was the name of Tia. With merely a token, Zen was still not sure of her identity, but he had his own assumption. The Cloud Road could only be opened by several specified sects under the Cloud Hall. And it wasn't the first time for Tia to enter the Cloud Road. The only explanation for why she could succeed for several times was that she herself might be from the Cloud Hall. Zen hoped to force Tia to tell him the truth with those questions so that he could be saved from all the guessing. But it seemed that she would rather give him her token than tell him her real background, and there was nothing Zen could do now. Most of the inheritance from Blood Fiend Emperor was here now. While Tia believed that these were left behind by Blood Fiend Emperor because they were not the most important ones and he didn't need them anymore, Zen thought these were more than enough. He took some of the treasures and stored them in the space ring and let Tia pack up the rest. Then Tia searched around the plaza again, but she found nothing valuable. Satisfied with the harvest, she took the crystal key and ascended the Flood Dragon puppet. The Flood Dragon puppet was a very important one in the inheritance from Blood Fiend Emperor. Although the Cyan Dragon didn't bother to devour it as the puppet had lost all the vital energy and blood, the giant Flood Dragon puppet was still priceless to Cloud Hall. If a war broke out, this Flood Dragon puppet could function as a war machine and could cause dreadful damages to the opponents with only one roar. They took the puppet and flew across the sky over the Cloud Road. Those who were struggling forward could only envy their luck. Frank saw the Flood Dragon as well. He suspected at once that Zen and that mysterious disciple could have survived. Could the flood dragon be a test on the cloud road? Or was it a shortcut? After all, the flood dragon appeared after they fell. What a coincidence. But he didn't believe in coincidence. Frank didn't think they could have survived, so he decided to put those thoughts aside. Watching the blood pool that he aspired to fly away was a heavy blow for him. He was profoundly demotivated and felt worn out. Like a gambler who had just lost all his fortune, he had no interest in others' outcome. Before long, the flood dragon puppet stopped at the exit of Cloud Road. As the giant dragon mouth opened, Zen jumped off first. He turned around and asked, "Aren't you coming with me?" Tia smiled and suddenly looked very serious. She patted the dragon's mouth and it closed. The dragon flew into the sky swiftly again, leaving Zen confused. Women were indeed incomprehensible. Zen shook his head and walked towards the eddy in the exit. Meanwhile, Frank and the others were marching on the 5th stage of Cloud Road while others were mostly stuck in the 4th stage. Only one person was left behind alone. Standing on a stone pillar in the sea of raging fire, Lennon was left speechless seeing the broken stones before him. Chapter 389, A Secret Left Untold. Several leaders along with the elder Fernandez Fay were waiting anxiously under an arch. Among the 5 leaders, the most anxious one was surely Kenneth. 3 disciples of Cloud Sect had taken the death road and he had heard nothing from them ever since. He didn't know what happened to them, but the first thing that came to his mind was they didn't make it. Auspice Sect, Iridescent Sect and Cloud Hall had 1 elite disciple each that took the death road. The Cloud Sect, on the other hand, might lose all his elites in the death road. So compared to Cloud Sect, the 2 sects were still fortunate. At first, Kenneth had high hopes for these 3 disciples. The 3 disciples could rank first or second in the other sects. So, he had thought that in the Cloud Road test, the Cloud Sect disciples would be able to make a splash and bring honor to the sect and himself. But he did not expect that they would suffer heavy losses on the death road. Aside from Kenneth, several leaders of the other sects and Fernandez also looked worried. The death of Frank might not affect the status of Elder Fernandez, but how could he explain it to Frank's father, Emmanuel? Just as their faces were clouded with worry, the crystals on the arch suddenly lit up and the cyclone whirled faster. Fernandez was surprised. What is going on? Has someone come out? How could it be possible? No one could ever pass the test so quickly. Kenneth was startled to see that as well. But they soon calmed down and thought about it in their minds. Through the picture slab, they got to know that most of their disciples were still struggling in the 4th stage and that there was still a whole 5th stage of the Cloud Road waiting for them. They estimated it to be at least a few more hours before they could get out. But if anyone was to come out at this time, it could only be the group led by Frank. So, did they pass the death road? Just as when the leaders were expecting to see Frank and his team, a figure suddenly emerged from the cyclone. Zen, Kenneth suddenly called out with great excitement and agitation at the same time. It was hard for the other leaders to fathom what Kenneth was feeling at that moment. He had always believed that Zen had good luck on his side and that his fate was already arranged by the heavens. After he found out that Yan was Zen's sister, he had an intuition that Yan was guiding Zen all the way. Even after the martial artists stepped into the internal elixir realm, most of them still believed in the disembodied thing called fate. In Kenneth's opinion, Yan's tragic experience was fated by the heavens to push Zen to run toward the peak of martial arts. Although it sounded like nonsense, he still believed in it. Somehow, he had confidence in Zen and believed that he would not die easily in the Cloud Road. At that moment, his expectation became reality, and of course, he got excited. And what made it more exciting for Kenneth was that Zen got the first place in the Cloud Road test. In the past, the first place had always belonged to the Cloud Hall disciples and there had been no exception. Until then, Kenneth couldn't even imagine a Cloud Sect disciple winning the first place. But Zen indeed broke the tradition and even completed the Cloud Road with astonishing speed. Normally, the first disciple would not come out until 150 or more supreme crystals with life vitality were consumed. But this time, only after 100 supreme crystals were consumed, Zen came out. Did he find a shortcut? At the sight of Zen, the leader of Iridescent Sect, Lady Long, and the leader of Auspice Sect, an old man in white, craned their necks to look behind Zen hoping to find their disciples. But even after waiting for a long time, no one came out after Zen. Lady Long's face suddenly darkened. She rushed toward Zen like a ghost and put her stick to Zen's throat. With one wrong move, Zen would die. She then snapped, "Hey, you! Tell me where Lois is. Lady Long was at Internal Elixir Realm. She had great strength and power. As a martial artist, her strength was on a par with Kenneth's. She released strong energy that overwhelmed Zen like a mountain. Her presence made him unable to breathe properly. If disciples with weaker strength were suppressed by the energy, then at best, they would feel their spiritual energy and blood being obstructed, or worst, they would get injured and fall to the ground. After passing the Cloud Road, Zen's spiritual energy had become stronger. He had not only soaked his body in the flood dragon's blood but also had eaten the blood vigor of that 9-headed dragon. So, in the face of the overwhelming power, he suffered an energy stasis but quickly recovered. Lady Long's arrogance annoyed Zen. He was a stubborn person with instinctive obstinacy. If she had asked him nicely, he would tell her the news about Lois. But she didn't. Therefore, Zen replied plainly, I have no idea. You have no idea? How can it be possible? Lady Long sneered, you took the death road with Frank and the others. I have seen it with my own eyes. How dare you lie to me? If you don't tell me the truth, I'm afraid that your good luck won't help you today. So, you'd better. Lady Long was in the middle of ranting when she suddenly felt a dangerous force approaching. She took a deep breath and backed away. Then, a shadow of a huge fist appeared at her feet. The impact of the fist shadow hitting the ground left a big hole on it. The ground tiles, the stones, and the mud under the ground tiles, were all wiped out by the force. Kenneth gave it his best shot to exert the fist. At that moment, his face was overcast, and his eyes were wide open. He was extremely angry. But even if he was furious, he had precise control over the strength of the fist. Zen was only a few feet away from Lady Long, but the damage was only limited to Lady Long's location, and Zen was not hurt at all. Jerk! How dare you bully my disciple? Do you not know my presence in here? Kenneth roared at Lady Long. You! How dare you threaten me? Do you think I'd be afraid of you? Lady Long waved her stick, ready to hit Kenneth. She felt frightened and angry at the same time. The power of the fist was quite strong that if she hadn't dodged it in time, she would have been injured and possibly have been dead. Then bring it on. Kenneth clenched his fists and stood straight with a sneer on his face. Calm down, everyone. Fernandez stepped in and stood firmly between them. Lady Long, don't be absurd, he said coldly to the woman, if you continue to make trouble, I'm afraid that I have to teach you a lesson myself. Amongst them, Fernandez was an elder. Compared to others, he had higher status and greater strength that even the likes Lady Long and Kenneth could not match. Looking at Lady Long's vexatious behavior, he eventually ran out of patience. Zen was only a junior who had just gone through a series of tests along the Cloud Road, but Lady Long treated him so mean. Fernandez couldn't stand her cruelty towards the young Zen. Furthermore, he thought very highly of Zen and favored the promising young man. Wherever he could be, he would always be outstanding. If ever he would come to Cloud Hall, he would surely be the hope of Cloud Hall. Elder Fernandez, Lady Long tried to argue. But seeing the looks on Fernandez's face, she didn't dare to argue. That's enough of your nonsense, Floret Long. You shut up and stay there. Don't let me say it again. His tone of voice held an unmistakable threat. There was no doubt that he would teach her a lesson if she continued to talk rubbish. Zen burst into a snigger when he heard Fernandez call Lady Long's name, Floret. He didn't expect such an old woman to have such a fancy name. Looking at Lady Long's long and darkened face, Zen couldn't compare her with a flower even when she was young. Zen knew it was immoral to make fun of other people's names, so he tried to stifle a smile but failed. In fact, Zen wasn't the only one. Several leaders also couldn't help laughing when they heard Fernandez call her by the name, Floret. As for the old man from the Auspice sect, he also smiled and shook his head. On the other hand, Lady Long, who had a well-developed instinct for anger, got furious. She considered it so humiliating to be laughed at by a junior. She looked like she was about to explode, and her wrinkles became more visible. Her anger was about to simmer over. But Fernandez was standing right in front of her now and he had just warned her, so she didn't dare to take any action. Then Fernandez turned to Zen and said in all seriousness, Zen, I know you, Frank, and the other 6 disciples have taken the death road. Why haven't I seen them come out yet? Hearing Fernandez's inquiry, Zen replied, we have met some troubles in the death road and I fell into an abyss. But they have gone out of the death road safe and sound. I guess they should still be on the Cloud Road by now. Don't worry, I figure they will soon come out. The exit of the death road was right above that abyss. For Frank's group, they were all with powerful strength. If they passed the death road, the succeeding tests in the cloud road should not be too difficult for them. Fernandez felt relieved to hear that the other disciples had also passed the death road. The long livid face of Lady Long finally relaxed. Although there were still many dangers in the cloud road, given the disciples' strength, they should be able to cope with them. You just said that you had fallen into an abyss, then how did you get through the cloud road so fast? Fernandez found it strange and asked. The other several leaders were also puzzled. It didn't make any sense that Zen could come out in such a short time. Did he find any shortcut in the abyss? Can I keep it as a secret? Asked Zen. If you don't want to tell me, I will respect your decision. You may leave the secret untold, Fernandez smiled. The other leaders also wanted to know whether there was a shortcut in the cloud road. If there was such a shortcut, then they could inform the next disciples who would take part in the next trial in another 3 years. But since Zen had refused to tell them the truth, they couldn't force him to. They all had the same idea that they shall ask him about it in the future. In their view, Zen was sure to become a disciple of Cloud Hall. Once he was in Cloud Hall, they would have plenty of opportunities to inquire about the said shortcut. Instead of waiting at the arch with the leaders, Zen then walked away. He sat on a small space and began to meditate. Within 2 hours, the cyclone under the arch began to whirl again, and then Rocher came out of it. The moment when Rocher appeared, the first person he saw was not Fernandez nor the other leaders. It was Zen who was meditating not far away. He froze as soon as he saw him. Chapter 390, Troublesome Frank. The way they passed through the final part of the cloud road was clearly different from that of Zen, who walked slowly on that part. Led by Frank, 5 of them had eventually finished the 5th stage of the cloud road. A smooth path that led directly to the finish line of cloud road greeted them at the end. At that moment, all of them wanted to be the first place. The death road was much shorter than the life road, so if they chose the former they could save time. It also meant that the possible first placer could be among the 5 of them. However, Frank still regretted not getting the blood pool. The first one who got aware of the current situation was Louis. Although he was carefree, he had a keen mind. Then he made a dash for the finishing point. The others soon realized what happened as well, and rushed out when they saw Louis run ahead of them. Now, it was time to see who had the best speed and endurance. Although Louis was extremely quick and had a strong, explosive power even stronger than Frank's, he had a low endurance. They were still far from the destination. Louis was far ahead of the other 4 people in the first half of the race. However, Frank eventually caught up with him with his extraordinary speed and endurance in the middle of the race. An unexpected incident suddenly broke out. When Louis boosted his speed, he attacked Frank. It was as if he turned into someone else. It was clear that Frank got very angry about it. He was both regretful and upset when he was reminded of the chance he lost last time. Thus, he was determined to take the first place this time. However, he never thought that Louis would make things difficult for him. How can you treat me like a sickly cat? I'm actually a sleeping tiger, Frank thought. Thus, he began to strike back as he had a burst of speed. They only wanted to disturb each other, so they didn't really fight that much. A few moments later, the other 3 had also caught up with them while they fought. Frank and Louis kept on fighting, which slowed their pace down, thus making Rocher become the first one who rushed into the whirlpool. Now, Rocher thought that he was the one who won the first place. However, when he looked around, he saw that Zen had already sat beside Fernandez and the other masters. Rocher could hardly believe his eyes at this moment. Zen was unexpectedly there as if by magic. It was really an incredible thing. This is absolutely impossible. No one can explain this, Rocher thought. At that time, I witnessed Zen fell into the gaping abyss. Even if he was lucky enough to have defeated the flood dragon and survived, how did he run ahead of me? He thought again. Rocher and his companions kept going forward without any breaks after they had passed through the death road. According to their plan, the 5 of them would arrive at the destination first since the death road was much shorter. They would make a record that was unprecedented in history. However, he saw Zen had already been sitting in meditation to practice when he got to the finish point. It seemed that he had waited at that place for a long time. How could Rocher think that Zen came here by riding a flood dragon puppet? Besides, he had spent a lot of time dividing the treasures on the island with Tia. On the other hand, another person had arrived while Rocher stood there in a trance. It was Frank. He looked livid as he gasped for breath. It took him a great effort to get rid of Louis, who was quite hard to deal with. I've only gotten second place. It was hard for Frank to accept the fact that he had fallen behind Rocher. To be the first in everything was his motto. For him, there was no point in being second place. If Louis hadn't gotten in my way, I would definitely have been first place. He's like a mad dog, so dealing with him took long. I will lay my hands on him after he gets to Cloud Hall, Frank thought. However, Rocher heard what he said and shook his head. You're not the second to arrive, he said. What, can you say that again? Frank was stunned. He obviously did not understand Rocher's words. At first, he thought that maybe Rocher would say something to console him, like, if Louis hadn't disturbed you, you would have been first. You finished third, Rocher answered. The third place, Frank said. He couldn't believe what he heard. Who got the first place? He said with a glare. Rocher pointed at Zen, who was not far from them. He's the first to arrive here, he said. When Frank saw Zen, he was so stunned that his eyes widened to the size of a plate. Zen, how can he be here? Isn't he dead already? Frank asked in shock. He was more confused about this compared with Rocher. He had never imagined this. He never thought that Zen had conquered the Flood Dragon and eventually got the first place. Could it be that? Could it be that the Flood Dragon had brought Zen here? Frank was an intelligent man, so he had thought of that possibility. However, he was confused as to why the Flood Dragon didn't eat Zen and sent him to the terminal point of the Cloud Road instead. Was it possible that the Flood Dragon didn't eat people, but helped them pass through the Cloud Road? It wasn't easy for him to think all of those scenarios. However, he would have never imagined that the Flood Dragon was really a controlled puppet. Moreover, he had never thought that the blood pool, which he tried so hard to get, was obtained by Zen. He had barely imagined that the rewards Zen had gained were tremendous. It was Zen who stole everything that belonged to him, he thought. Many things in the world were the results of serendipity. If Tia had dragged Frank into the abyss instead of Zen, Frank might still have failed to destroy the enchanted barrier with his white spear and get the treasures of the Blood Fiend Emperor. After a while, Louis had arrived after the whirlpool revolved for a bit. Frank stopped thinking about how Zen came first to the destination and turned to Louis. Louis, how dare you block me? He shouted angrily. I will make you pay the price. He was still mad about the situation, although he was aware that he wouldn't have gotten the first place even if he had run ahead of Rocher. Louis simply laughed at Frank's words. Haha, I just wanted to stop you. But what can you do to me? Fury consumed Frank so much that he couldn't say a word. What he wanted to do the most was to fight with Louis. At that exact moment, the old man in white from the Auspice sect appeared and said, Louis, come to me. Louis was the personal disciple of the old man and was also the pride of the Auspice sect. The old man was afraid that Louis might suffer defeat. He also didn't want to offend Frank's father, Emmanuel. Thus, he called Louis to his side just in time. Meanwhile, Louis was also surprised to find that Zen was still alive. The next one who came out of the whirlpool was Patrick, followed by Lois. The cultivation method Patrick had practiced was that of Buddhism, so he failed to run fast. Thus, in terms of running, he was only a little quicker than Lois. The two of them rushed out of the whirlpool at almost the same time. They were also amazed at how Zen had come here and looked at him in shock. Why do you all look at Zen that way? Fernandez asked. It's really amazing that Zen has outrun all of you, but you don't need to stare at him like that. He isn't a ghost, he said. Zen stood up from the ground when he saw Rocher and Patrick. He went up to them and clapped them on the shoulder with a smile. The three disciples of Cloud Sect had passed through the Cloud Road and got the first, second, and fifth places, respectively. Kenneth was quite satisfied with the results. Their sect only had 3 places for this competition since they were just a second-grade sect. However, their 3 disciples who participated in the match all ranked in the top 5. For Kenneth, this had made him even happier than when he found a buried treasure. Zen, I saw you fall into the abyss. Weren't you eaten by that flood dragon? Frank suddenly asked Zen sharply in front of everyone. Doesn't that flood dragon eat people? Did you come to the destination by riding that flood dragon? Where is the mysterious disciple of Cloud Hall? Is he with you? Frank fired more questions at him. He was aware that Zen wouldn't answer his question in private. Thus, he chose to ask Zen in front of Fernandez and the other masters. That was his real intention. Fernandez and the other masters all looked at Zen when they heard that he had met the flood dragon. This guy really wants to cause me more trouble, Zen thought with a frown. Chapter 391. Like father, like son. Most of the disciples who had chosen the death road had survived and come out from the cloud road. The result wasn't as they expected because Zen was the first one who got out, but both Lady Long from Iridescent sect and the old man from Auspice sect were still satisfied since their disciples made it out of the death road alive. It was generally a happy ending for everyone. While the rest were celebrating their own victories, the leader of Brahma's sect was quite displeased. He could not help but frown and then asked, "Hold on, Zaid is still not here. Where is he? Why isn't he here?" Hearing Zaid's name rang a sad bell in the ears of every disciple present at that moment. Everyone stared at the leader of Brahma's sect in silence. Their eyes were speaking, but they couldn't seem to find words to express what they knew. Frank looked around to see who would break the news about Zaid. However, when he realized that no one was brave enough to say a thing, he finally spoke. "The death road has claimed his life. Zaid was swallowed by the dark devil phantom when he was picking a herb." When the disciples started to come out from the cloud road one after the other, the leader of Brahma's sect had the bad feeling that Zaid didn't make it. As he watched the disciples come out, he was becoming more convinced that Zaid didn't survive the death road. He knew already, but he wanted to hear it from the disciples, and Frank's words were the closure he needed. The world of cultivators was cruel. Even the toughest disciple in the world could meet his demise at any moment with one wrong judgment. Though Zaid was courageous enough to try for the death road with Frank, his strength was not enough to survive given that he was only at the 4th place in Brahma's sect. It was a gamble for Zaid to take the death road this year. He could win, and if he did, he could at least be in the 6th place in the cloud road. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on his side this time, and being part of Frank's team didn't assure him of success. He failed at the expense of his own life. The leader of the Brahma sect was disappointed, but he couldn't do anything at this moment. He didn't know that Zaid's greed would cost him his life. If only he wasn't so greedy to pick the black herb, he would still be alive by now. After telling what he knew, Frank then turned his gaze at Zen. He vowed that he wouldn't let him get away with it easily. Moreover, he was curious at what happened to Zen at the death road. Everyone else also fixed their eyes at Zen. They were still saying nothing, but their gazes were saying so much that got Elder Fernandez wondering. Frank noticed the change in Elder Fernandez's expression and took the liberty to explain, "Elder Fernandez, forgive me for speaking. But I would like to tell you the reason we're all staring at Zen. From what we have witnessed in the death road, he is supposed to be dead. But it's a wonder that he's here with us now unharmed." "Dead? What do you mean? What happened to him in the death road?" Fernandez asked curiously. "The last challenge in the death road was to climb up the floating stones in a huge abyss. We were all there taking that last challenge, and we saw him being dragged down by a Cloud Hall disciple. We couldn't be mistaken. It was him, and I believe everyone else saw it, too." After he spoke those words, Frank looked at Zen and slyly smiled. He knew that Zen would not tell him the truth if he asked the latter himself. But Zen wasn't stupid to defy Elder Fernandez. Frank was sure that Zen would tell the elder the truth if the elder asked Zen directly. "I see. Well, Zen said that he fell into an abyss, but he missed that part where he was dragged down by someone," Fernandez said, as if trying to comprehend what really happened. Earlier, Zen didn't want to tell everyone about what happened, and Fernandez respected his decision. But now that they heard half of the truth about what happened, everyone else including Fernandez became curious. The ball was now in Zen's hands to say something about him being dragged down by a mysterious Cloud Hall disciple. The attention the topic was getting fired up Frank. He liked that Zen was not in the hot seat and the fact that the latter could not lie in Fernandez's face. He slyly smiled again and continued, "Again, pardon me for saying. But it is also likely that Zen hasn't told you about the flood dragon down the abyss." "A what?" Fernandez was surprised upon hearing this. He hadn't moved on from the fact that Zen was dragged down by a mysterious Cloud Hall disciple, and now he was hearing another amazing event at the death road. Earlier, Fernandez and the leaders of each sect had learned from the picture slab that there was a huge dragon on the cloud road. They saw the rays of lights appeared in the sky and the cloud road seemed slightly different. They had never expected that the flood dragon was originally down in the abyss. "As soon as we entered the abyss, we were chased by that flood dragon. Apparently, the flood dragon wanted to devour us, and our instinct told us to run. Zen, on the other hand, was dragged down to the mouth of the flood dragon by that Cloud Hall disciple. We didn't know why, and we assumed that they both died. But we were surprised to see that he had not only survived but also completed the trial ahead of us all. It was strange, but I am not in the position to ask Zen myself, Frank said to Elder Fernandez. He was suggesting that Elder Fernandez had the right to ask Zen about what happened. Frank grinned at Zen and was waiting for his response. But to Frank's dismay, Zen remained calm and indifferent as if he didn't hear a thing that Frank said. Unlike with Zen, Frank's word aroused Fernandez's curiosity and that of the rest of the sect leaders. From what Frank had said, they concluded that Zen had a connection with the Flood Dragon and the Cloud Hall disciple. If not, how could Zen have survived that fall unharmed? Even Fernandez himself would avoid such a full-grown Flood Dragon at all cost. With his strength, Fernandez could survive that Flood Dragon, but not without a scratch. So, how did Zen survive from the mouth of the dragon unharmed? Perhaps Zen was indeed lucky. Even so, he could at least have some scratches, or wouldn't finish ahead of everyone. The only viable reason was that Zen had some connection with the Flood Dragon. Kenneth became curious about it as well. He was eagerly waiting for Fernandez to ask the question so they could all finally hear the truth from Zen. Without waiting for Fernandez to speak, Zen took the initiative to explain himself. First, he made a palm and fist salute, then said, "Elder Fernandez, please forgive me. It's not that I don't want to tell you the truth, but I made an oath with that disciple not to tell anyone anything." It was clear that Zen wouldn't say anything. It seemed that he wasn't lying either about the oath. And with that, everything that Frank said to get the truth from Zen was put in vain. Zen knew what Frank was thinking and thought that it was naive for Frank to do such a thing. Fernandez looked at Zen and pondered for a while. He took a deep breath, then he said, "Zen, I will respect your decision to honor your oath and I won't force you to tell. But I must ask, who is the disciple who dragged you down that Flood Dragon's mouth? Is he really a Cloud Hall disciple?" Zen knew that it was imperative that he told Elder Fernandez about the identity of the said disciple because it concerned the safety of the whole Cloud Hall. He said that he was from Cloud Hall and I believe it. But as to his real identity, I'm afraid he didn't tell much, Zen said as he shook his head. Fernandez sighed and said, "You know that the Cloud Road is the place where our elite disciples are tested and selected. But I also believe that everyone has his own secret, and we must respect it. I will drop this matter, for the time being, Zen. But I hope you can give us an answer in the future." Zen nodded and smiled. He was relieved that Elder Fernandez didn't push more about the issue for the time being. As he stepped aside, he swiped a look at Frank. Frank was dismayed. He saw the proud look at Zen's face as Elder Fernandez politely dismissed the issue. Frank felt indignant seeing that Zen got away with it easily. But what Frank didn't know was that Zen was now Elder Fernandez's apple of the eye. After the Cloud Road test, Zen's future potentials and importance had already surpassed Frank's. With this, Fernandez was unwilling to offend Zen by pushing him to tell the truth. For Fernandez, there was a time for everything, and that matter was none of his business for now. Moreover, now that Zen was a Cloud Hall elite, Elder Fernandez wanted to be on his good side. Elder Fernandez's words were final. The topic was finally put aside for the moment, and no one would know what really happened to Zen inside the Flood Dragon. After everyone had settled, the disciples stood behind their leaders and waited for the rest of the disciples to get back from the Cloud Road. After a few hours, a dark figure suddenly flashed from a distant ruin. With its speed, no one could tell who it was. Fernandez nodded when he saw the dark figure. He smiled and said, "Well, this is a surprise. I didn't expect Emmanuel to come anyway." Upon hearing it, Frank looked carefully. When he finally recognized who the dark figure was, he shouted, "Father!" Judging from his restrained imposing manner, it was hard to tell how strong he was. But it was safe to assume that he was at the same level as Elder Fernandez. Fernandez. As he arrived, Emmanuel made a fist and palm salute to Fernandez. The latter immediately returned the salutation. Other leaders also acknowledged the presence of Emmanuel and made their salutations, "Master Joe." "I'm glad to be here, everyone," Emmanuel gave them a slight nod. Then he immediately turned to his son and asked, "Frank, how was the trial? Tell me, what place are you in this time?" Before he could even greet his father, Frank's face turned clouded upon hearing the question. He could not afford to look at his father as he said, "I only take the third place." "What, did I hear it right?" Emmanuel was surprised knowing that his son only made it to the third place. For so many years, Frank had always made it to the first place, and Emmanuel was never expecting any less from his son. Frank was born into a wealthy family. Everything was specially supplied to his family. They even had the red rice called dragon blood rice, which contained vital energy which if you had eaten for 10 years, its benefits would show up. The dragon blood rice was so expensive that it was impossible even for the emperor from the Burning Sky Palace in the eastern region to eat it in every meal. But Frank always had dragon blood rice in every meal. It was common for their family. Frank had all the best things in life, from the rice and other food, to the cultivation methods, and the people who taught him. It could be said that Frank had lived an abundant life from the day he was born. Emmanuel had poured all his heart into his son. He made sure that Frank would get all the best things to help him become better. And Frank, in return, had not disappointed him. He had inherited Emmanuel's talent in learning the consummate spear intent. With such excellent cultivation base, it was expected that Frank would always win the first place. He did for the past years. But something unexpected happened this year, and Frank had finally had the bitter taste of failure for the first time in his life. Emmanuel was quite concerned about this year's trial at the very beginning. However, with his busy schedule, he couldn't arrive in time. But as soon as he got things done, he rushed here to hear the good news from his son. He could even taste the pride of being the father of the most elite Cloud Hall disciple and could not wait to see that envy in each sect leader's eyes. But to his dismay, his son only made it to third place. Emmanuel was rather disappointed. It was as if cold water was poured on his head when Frank told him the bad news. He was confused at that time. He couldn't think of any other disciple who could outshine his son if that kind of disciple ever existed in this lifetime. Could it be Lenin from the South Wangjiao family? But how was it possible? No one in the Cloud Hall could outperform Frank. Even if they tried their best to improve, Frank was still way ahead of them. How could any disciple from those second-level sects have such strength? Tell me, who made it to first place? Emmanuel asked. Frank pointed to Zen, who was standing not so far away from them. Emmanuel looked at the direction his son was pointing at. He was expecting someone at his same level. But to his further dismay, it was only a disciple at the 4th grade of nature level, and his name was Zen. Watching from his position, Fernandez sensed that something bad was about to happen. He knew Emmanuel's temper and that the latter was not a magnanimous person to allow others to outperform Frank. Fernandez was worried that Emmanuel might try to embarrass Zen. Kenneth had also noticed that, but as a steward of Cloud Hall, he had no say in Emmanuel's presence. He had only hoped that Fernandez would intervene in time. Then Frank whispered something to Emmanuel, then everyone saw a subtle smile cross Emmanuel's face. He then made his way towards Zen with that smile on his face. He could still not believe that the disciple who outranked his son was only with the 4th grade of nature level. It was the most ridiculous thing he had heard so far in his life. With what Frank had told him about the trial, Emmanuel was now pretty sure that Zen won the first place with just mere luck. So, Frank told me that your name is Zen. Is that right? I owe you congratulations on winning the first prize. Now that you have become one of the elites of Cloud Hall, we will focus on training you, Emmanuel said. But my son has told me something about the Cloud Road that concerns me. And I believe, for the sake of the Cloud Hall, you should explain to us everything that has happened during the test and how did you become the first one out of the Cloud Road. Chapter 392, Voice Message. Emmanuel Joe adopted a commanding stance and then bluntly ordered Zen in a firm voice. He declared that Zen had to recount what had exactly happened on the Cloud Road to the smallest detail. In other words, he subtly hinted that it would be wise if Zen wouldn't conceal anything about the event. Emmanuel thought that he had spoken to Zen clearly and politely enough. His stance differed from Fernandez's. Fernandez had been quite old. Although he still acted as the Cloud Hall's elder, these days he was mainly responsible for dealing with mundane affairs like choosing elites among disciples. However, Emmanuel was in the prime of his life, and his strength was at its peak. As a mainstay of the Cloud Hall, he looked down upon Zen. Perhaps he would have treated Zen with less respect if he hadn't won the first place. Emmanuel clearly knew that everyone was vying to obtain the treasures on the Cloud Road, since all of the treasures were inherited from a grade 6 sect. A few moments ago, Frank had informed him that a flood dragon had appeared on the Cloud Road. Furthermore, Emmanuel knew from Frank that countless streaks of light were manifested on the Cloud Road, and then all of a sudden, all of the treasures were assembled together in one place. Even though Emmanuel himself couldn't step onto the Cloud Road, his son still had a chance to enter. The gateway to the Cloud Road was only opened every 3 years, because of the enormous amount of crystals necessary to trigger the opening. Specifically, it would cost hundreds of Supreme Life Vitality crystals to trigger an opening. Emmanuel schemed that he was willing to spend that exorbitant amount of crystals in opening the gateway to the Cloud Road once again so that Frank could attempt to obtain the treasures, as long as he could glean useful information from Zen. He would benefit greatly from the treasures inherited from the Grade 6 sect. All eyes were trained on Zen as soon as the command was uttered from Emmanuel's mouth. Frank blatantly sneered at Zen, muttering to himself, "I have asked you to tell me the whole truth before, but you outright refused. Now, my father is here, demanding you to reveal that same truth. My father doesn't play around." Gloom was apparent on both Kenneth's and Fernandez's faces, silence befalling them. It would be inappropriate for them to speak for Zen, because they would surely offend Emmanuel. As for the other sect leaders, they didn't say anything either, as Zen was not a disciple of their sects, and in fact, they were also curious as to what Zen had encountered on the Cloud Road. Both Roche and Patrick could do nothing but sigh deeply in despair. They surmised that Zen had no choice but to reveal the truth. Contrary to their expectations, Zen blinked multiple times, stared Emmanuel right in his eyes and stated, "Master Joe, I survived the Cloud Road entirely because of my own good luck. Why should I reveal anything to you? Is there any reason why I should tell you?" From the start, Emmanuel had expected Zen to reveal the truth in its entirety, or he would conceal just a little bit of the truth, but he never expected this outright rejection. As Zen questioned why he should recount the story to Emmanuel, the faces of the 5 sect leaders and Fernandez portrayed expressions of disbelief. This guy is asking for it, they all thought. Emmanuel was so ill-tempered that the stewards of the Cloud Hall were often scared out of their wits when they crossed paths with Emmanuel. However, Zen, merely a young disciple who hadn't even been selected as an elite, dared to question Emmanuel that way. Zen definitely knew how powerful Emmanuel was in his position. Upon hearing Zen's defiant words, the sect leaders began to admire Zen for his great courage. At the same time, they also got worried. Frank, who was standing in the sidelines, had his mouth agape in disbelief. He even thought he was having a nightmare. Ever since he was a little kid, he had never witnessed anyone who dared disrespect his father. Even the folks at the internal elixir realm didn't have the nerves to speak to his father that way. Zen was only a nature creature. How could he? Frank could sense his father's immediate fury. He also knew that death was now the only choice for Zen. Even though he himself was Emmanuel's son, he dared not utter a single word, for fear that he would further infuriate his father. "Why?" Emmanuel repeated that word slowly, his face appearing like an expressionless mask. Soon, he burst into laughter and continued, "Ah ha ha, you asked me why. Do you take me for a fool just because you think that you've reached a much higher level after you won the first place on the Cloud Road? You are merely a nature creature, so you are in no position to question me. Now, let me tell you the reason, you ignorant wretch. You are an insect in my eyes. You can be gone from this world in an instant. That is reason enough for you." Unlike others, Emmanuel was rather calm. It seemed that he didn't need to showcase his fury and power to match Zen's imposing manner. It was precisely because of this that Emmanuel was scary. However, Zen remained unblinking and composed. It was impossible for him to reveal anything that he encountered on the Cloud Road to anyone else. On the other hand, he wanted to glean more information about who Tia was. As the Cyan Dragon guessed, Tia was definitely more powerful than the disciples at the Illuminating Soul Realm, and might have practiced some cultivation methods which required people to practice anew repeatedly when reaching a certain point. These cultivation methods were rather hard to master and refine, but one's power would increase exponentially if he or she successfully mastered the methods. Tia might be a powerful plater at the Cloud Hall if the Cyan Dragon's guess was correct. Zen dared estimate that Tia might even be more powerful than Emmanuel at least. "What if I don't tell you anything?" Zen replied flatly with a wry smile. At this moment, he had secretly siphoned life vitality into Tia's token. "Hey, since you refuse to reveal the truth, I am not interested in listening to your words anymore. Instead, I will search the source, your soul." Emmanuel didn't threaten Zen at all, but intended to directly scour Zen's soul. To search Zen's soul, Emmanuel had to directly access Zen's brain to invade it, using a secret technique that let him skim through Zen's memories. Only the most powerful people knew this technique. As Kenneth heard that Emmanuel was going to search Zen's soul, he found it hard to keep silent. Zen was, after all, a disciple of his Cloud sect. And so Kenneth hurriedly stepped forth and said, "Master Joe, Zen was out of his mind just now. Please grant him another chance." As soon as he pleaded, he turned around to face Zen and reprimanded, "Zen, reveal all to Emmanuel instantly. You must not conceal anything from him. Kenneth spoke to Zen in a stern voice, since he was afraid that Emmanuel would really scour Zen's soul. Soul searching was not a small thing. One whose soul was scoured would suffer various mental damages when the memories were extracted. In simpler terms, Zen would turn into a simpleton if his soul was to be searched. Kenneth, idiot off, Emmanuel retorted loudly, blatantly disregarding Kenneth's position. Master Joe, there is no need to be so worked up on some naive boy. Please, for my sake. Kenneth begged with a smile while bowing with his hands clasped in front of him. Idiot off, I said. Emmanuel yelled coldly. Then, he promptly added after a few moments of consideration, Kenneth, tell me why I should do this for you. Sir, don't beg him any more, Zen said expressionlessly. Since the cyan dragon was protecting his soul from intrusion, Zen did not fear the soul search. The cyan dragon was a hidden advantage Zen possessed. Although he seemed to still be very weak at the moment, he had consumed the flood dragon's spirit and drunk an entire pond of the flood dragon's blood. Zen believed that the cyan dragon wouldn't ignore him in his crisis. Besides, Zen was still waiting. He wanted to see if Tia would grant him a favor. In spite of Kenneth's pleadings, Emmanuel approached Zen with long, powerful strides. Kenneth, who stood beside him, dared not impede him. In the current situation, Zen still stood where he originally was, but he was a little short of breath. When Emmanuel was only about a couple of steps away from Zen, a small piece of rune suddenly appeared near Emmanuel's ear. A few seconds later, a little spark shone and burned up the rune in an instant. All the sect leaders present recognized the rune, which could transmit voice messages over a long distance by the use of one's life vitality. Emmanuel's ears perked up as if he was listening to an unseen voice. Soon afterwards, he frowned and looked rather sullen, staring at Zen with a complex expression. Moments which seemed like an eternity passed by as everyone was waiting with bated breath. A few seconds later, Emmanuel glared at Zen and sneered, "You better thank your good luck. Frank, let's go." As soon as Emmanuel uttered the words, he flung himself into the sky and hovered for a few seconds. Then, he quickly dissolved into a gray shadow and rapidly disappeared. Frank was dumbfounded and confused by his father's words. At the beginning, Frank silently wished something horrible to happen to Zen as he watched in silence. He wanted to witness firsthand his father searching Zen's soul so that Zen would be reduced to a bumbling idiot. Frank would have been so ecstatic to witness such an event. On the Cloud Road, Frank felt that Zen was mighty. It was clear how Zen was an absolute threat to his ascendancy at the Cloud Hall. Thus, no outcome would be greater than Zen's demise. However, Frank never expected his father to abruptly give up scouring Zen's soul. What went wrong? Why was a voice message suddenly transmitted with the aid of life vitality? Who would be so powerful? Who was able to change his father's mind that quickly? Although Frank's mind was plagued with questions, he dared not utter a word as he noticed his father's grim expression. Instead, he just gave Zen an intense look and flew closely behind his father. At this moment, only the sect leaders, Fernandez and Zen, stood where they had been. They were all very much confused by the sudden turn of events. Like Frank, they were also wondering who on earth had sent a voice message that convinced Emmanuel so easily. Chapter 393, What Did She Say? Emmanuel enjoyed a very high position in Cloud Hall. He too was an elder like Fernandez, but the latter was an old man with little potential for any further progress and belonged to the inferior group. On the other hand, Emmanuel was in the prime of his life and was in a peak condition for martial refinement. Due to his formidable strength, he was one of the most powerful elders in Cloud Hall. The message rune that had reached Emmanuel's ears for several seconds only comprised of a few words. There were only a handful of people who could persuade Emmanuel into leaving with such a short sentence. But who could it be? Zen had entered the Cloud Road for the first time. He had never been to the central region before, and had never gotten the chance to know any top leaders of Cloud Hall. Given that, who could be the person who decided to step in and help him? Several sect leaders were puzzled, pondering over that question. Kenneth focused his eyes at Zen with a convulsed expression on his face. Suddenly, the young disciple of his own sect started to seem strange to him. He believed he knew Zen well and prided himself for being one of the only people who knew his secrets. But it was finally becoming clear to him that there was a lot he didn't know. Zen was a nature creature, but that didn't help reduce Kenneth's shock at what he had done in front of Emmanuel. Even though Zen wasn't threatened by Emmanuel anymore, Kenneth's head was still full of worries. "You were acting impetuously, Zen," he said. Following Kenneth's words, Fernandez nodded and said, I agree. I don't know who are you relying on, but I don't think it's a wise choice for you to act out against Emmanuel. He left you unharmed today, but don't forget you have to face him many times in Cloud Hall. If he decides to go against you, you will be in great danger. Fernandez had almost figured out who had helped Zen, as there weren't many possible answers. As far as he knew, the only people who could ask Emmanuel to leave were the current and former Cloud Hall leaders. The former leader hadn't showed up in public occasions for over 100 years. It wasn't a big stretch to assume that the current Cloud Hall leader was the only possible person who could have asked Emmanuel to leave. But that wasn't it. The next question that pestered Fernandez was if Zen even knew the Cloud Hall leader to that extent. How did they know each other? Where did they meet? As per what Fernandez had heard, the Cloud Hall leader had been in a closed-door cultivation for 2 years. If that was indeed true, it was impossible for them to meet each other. Elder Fernandez, Mr. Shi, Zen bowed to Fernandez and Kenneth with cupped hands. Thanks for your concern. I know I've overdone it, but I had no other choice. After all, my experiences in the Cloud Road matter a lot. My sanctity will never allow me to tell them to anyone else, even to Master Joe. What's more, even if I did as he asked me to, do you think he'd have let me go easily? Zen's words had a tone of authority and reason. Both Fernandez and Kenneth fell silent after he finished. They knew this young disciple was right. Emmanuel's immense progress in martial refinement in the past 2 years had enhanced his position in the Cloud Hall, but at the same time had also stirred up his arrogance and hubris. If Zen really had yielded to Emmanuel's threats and told him the secrets of Cloud Road, the unscrupulous elder would still have been doubtful of his words and found another excuse to search his soul. The weak always became lambs to be slaughtered. Zen had already learned this during his time in the eastern region and knew it would be no different here in the central region. Right at that moment, the other disciples in the Cloud Road finished their trials. Hooray! I'm in the first place this year. As a shrill shout of joy emerged from the exit of Cloud Road, a disciple rushed out with a victorious smile on his face. He had taken lead in the Life Road, sure that nobody had arrived before him. Being the first disciple to finish the trial made him feel like he was living a daydream. He himself knew Frank and Lennon were far more talented than him and how difficult it was to stand out among all the disciples. However, Frank had taken the risk and chosen the dangerous death road. As for Lennon, he had disappeared during the whole process. Naturally, this disciple believed he had finished first. But the daydream didn't last too long. To be specific, it ended as soon as he saw Zen, Roche, Lois and Patrick. His happy smile froze and his laugh started to sound harsh to his own ears. With his face twitching, he looked away and silently stepped aside. I'm the second. Another disciple emerged behind him, rushing out of the exit with the same excitement he was exerting a while ago. Being in second place too was a satisfying outcome. But this disciple then raised his hand and saw the other disciples before him. The look on his face changed dramatically, just like the first one. And I'm the third, another one shrieked. The comical scene repeated yet again, amusing the sect leaders and Fernandez as it alleviated the tense atmosphere that persisted a few moments ago. Gradually, more and more disciples passed the trials. The last one to finish was Lennon. In fact, he was almost on the verge of failing the test. He had no ways to head the Life Road, which had a broken part, nor did he have the courage to choose the Death Road. He was left with no choice but to return to the platform alone, waiting for the end of the test, thinking he was sure to die. In this stage of isolation and helplessness, he suddenly saw a flood dragon flying toward him from a distance. Frightened by the giant creature, Lennon tumbled on the ground, almost falling into the rolling lava in the sea of raging fire. To his surprise, the dragon didn't hurt him, instead stretched out its tail toward him in a friendly way. Accepting its kindness, Lennon decided to take his chances. If he didn't, he would anyway die waiting for the end of the Cloud Road test. This dragon was his only chance of survival. He climbed on top of its tail and crawled to its back. The dragon sprinted into the sky with a wild roar and swiftly carried him to the Life Road. Even though he was the last one to finish, he felt happy enough. The only thing that mattered to him was that he had escaped death with a narrow margin. How did the rank matter when he felt so great simply to be alive? After all the disciples finished their trials, they gathered around Fernandez, who then majestically announced the list of disciples who had qualified for admission into the elite house of Cloud Hall. Other than the millions of disciples in the 5 subordinate sects, the Cloud Hall also had another group of disciples who were directly under its own charge. Frank and Lennon belonged to this group, which nearly comprised of 1 million disciples. Although that sounded like a great figure, it wasn't, relative to the population of the central region. In fact, the number of disciples under Cloud Hall was smaller than many other grade 4 sects. For example, the Bloodwood Cliff and the 9-Star School both had at least 4 to 5 million disciples. As for the only grade 5 sect in the central region, it had over 10 million disciples, which could amount to an entire country's population. Nonetheless, not all disciples succeeded in their martial refinement. Over 90% of them ended up in the nature level and only a small portion achieved the illuminating soul realm, which too wasn't that big of a deal. It had to be combined with marvelous strength and great talent to attract the attention of top leaders and train under their elite sects. Zen, Frank, Lois, and every other disciple who passed the Cloud Road were all selected from millions of disciples. Each of them was already at the top of the tree, but needed to pass the test of Cloud Road before they were qualified to join the elite house. Every disciple of the elite house was Cloud Hall's hope for the future. As Fernandez read out the names on the list, Zen was distracted looking for Tia in the crowd. He looked all around him multiple times but couldn't find her. Tia truly was a master of disguise. She had managed to conceal her real identity not just from Zen, but also Fernandez. However, she wasn't able to deceive the Cyan Dragon despite her perfect disguise. There she is, the third one to the left of the disciples. The Cyan Dragon's voice came from within Zen's head as he squinted his eyes to make out Tia's form in the distance. He followed the dragon's words, and as he stared at her ordinary face, he found her looking back at him at the same time. She pretended to just be glancing at him when she caught him staring at her. She was trying to figure if he could see through her disguise. To her surprise, Zen's eyes were dead stuck on her, like he saw her clearly. Had he recognized her? That was impossible. She was confident about her disguise. Zen wasn't even a cultivator of the internal elixir realm. He couldn't be able to see through her. What she didn't know was the disguise did not function before the Cyan Dragon. The mighty creature could locate her very soul. Tia put up a nonchalant face even though she was a bit uncomfortable with Zen's eyes fixed on her. Soon, though, the pretense had to be given up. Why was that? Because she noticed a faint smile appearing across Zen's face, as if he was saying, "Be done with the tricks. I already know who you are. He's a blasted pain. He really did find me out," she thought to herself. She pouted, glaring at him angrily. She pursed her lips together and sent him a message with her life vitality, "Stop staring at me, or I'll gouge your eyes out." Zen laughed with no fear at her words. He knew Tia was in a higher position than Emmanuel. She was the one who had driven him away with just a sentence. He had no worries because even though Fernandez had found out Tia's real identity, he would never dare to expose the truth. "Hey, what did you say to Master Joe with that message rune a while ago?" Zen asked, returning a message with his life vitality. Tia smiled slyly and replied, "I told him it was none of his business and asked him to get out of here immediately." Zen was rendered speechless. Although he knew she was in a very high position, he hadn't expected her to have been so rude to Emmanuel. Now Zen knew why had Emmanuel's face been so low when he left silently. Chapter 394, The Cloud Hall Token. Morning came in a burst of light and color, sending a stream of light into the waking world. In other places, one could only see rainbows after rain stopped. However, it was something that was as commonplace as a stray cloud in Cloudy City. The view could always be traced back to the giant rock floating above the city, and the magnificent palace built atop it, floating over the land like a cloud-born sentry. The palace was surrounded by layers of clouds, and only when the sky was crystal blue could the citizens see the vague outline of the palace. The sight of it rendered the onlookers speechless. It was a masterpiece of architecture and ode to its very workmanship. For those who had chanced to lay their eyes on the palace, it was a view worthy of the gods. And whoever lived in it was seen as such. In the eyes of mortal men, many martial artists were no different from ranks of gods. They were the closest examples of divinity on earth. These men could accomplish incredible feats exceeding an ordinary mortal. They could fly in the sky, burrow into the depths of the earth, move mountains and drain the seas. Some of them could even live for hundreds or thousands of years. What else could they be except gods? But, like the ordinary civilians of the city, there were also martial artists for whom the magnificent palace held a different meaning. It could not compare to the true palaces of the gods in the tales and legends of old, but it was something that signified it. Cloud Hall, another name they called the Floating Palace, was a fourth-rate sect which was famous in Central Region. Cloud Hall was built on this giant floating rock whose origin was unknown to all. When it was built, there was an array absorbing the energy around the palace for the martial artists in it. The energy it obtained was so immense that even the clouds surrounding the Cloud Hall were drawn to it, forming a curtain of white and hiding the palace from view. That day, the array in Cloud Hall's left side began shimmering. Beams of light fell to the earth, and from it, people began to walk out one after another. Zen instinctively sniffed the moment he stepped out of the light. He was feeling lightheaded. The rich vitality in Cloud Hall had almost gotten him drunk with energy. His body thrummed with the excesses. There was no place in the whole eastern region foliaged with such dense energy. Patrick, Louis and Rocher, the disciples of the second-rated sects, were having the same feelings as Zen. Their legs gave off slight trembles from under them. Upon seeing them seemingly affected by the rich vitality, the disciples from Cloud Hall all cast them haughty glimpses. These supercilious bunch, including Lenin, had not cultivated themselves in Cloud Hall. For most, they trained themselves in a place called Cloud School, in Cloudy City. From there, hand-picked disciples who were the finest of finest, like Lenin, were given chances to enter Cloud Hall. As for Frank, he often cultivated in Cloud Hall thanks to his father. Since they were all disciples of elite house of Cloud Hall, they were befitting of entry to Cloud Hall. Following Fernandez, the disciples headed towards elite house. The gargantuan palace towered over Zen and the others. They fixed their eyes on Cloud Hall, unable to take their gazes off its grandeur. The most illustrious of praises fell short of its magnificence. It was a truly incredible sight to behold. A floating palace was hard for one to fathom, but Zen thought it would be possible to understand the mechanism if he started with its basic principles. He had already seen floating rocks back in Cloud Road. These rocks seemed to repel gravity, hence they were capable of floating in the air. A palace could be built on a floating rock, if it was big enough. But Cloud Hall was gigantic structure. It needed a rock which should be as big as an island in order to support it. As for the origins of a rock of such size, it was something that was beyond Zen's knowledge. Mist floated around like a translucent curtain of moisture, lending a surreal aura to the place and making the disciples look to be walking on air. They walked through Cloud Hall following Fernandez. Before long, they arrived at the elite house. All of the disciples, regardless of their origins, were thrumming with excitement. After years of fierce competition with others, they finally became an elite disciple of Cloud Hall. It was a much coveted position, the pinnacle of their calling, for many of them. However, for Zen, it was only a beginning. Fernandez led them to elite house and handed them over to another person. Soon enough, murmurs filled the hall as the disciples began chattering with one another in uncontainable excitement. There were exchanges of stories, and the disciples from Cloud Hall even started boasting of the things they saw and heard. After all, growing up in the central region had a lot of advantages. They had a wider experience than the disciples from the second-rated sects. Louis and other disciples all listened to their tales carefully and with interest. It seemed that a rank system would be employed in elite house. It closely resembled the point system of Cloud Sect. Everyone in elite house will be given a Cloud Hall token. It comes in 5 different colors: purple, yellow, golden, cyan and red. Each of the colors represents ranks of power. With these tokens, we can enter countless mystical places to cultivate ourselves. Since we have just entered elite house, we start with the lowest rank. The red Cloud Hall token will be given to us. But don't you look down upon these red tokens. The mystical places we can enter with it are 100 times better than the places where you used to cultivate yourselves. In the middle of their boasting, 2 steward guards of Cloud Hall came in. Zen sized the 2 up and found that they were all in internal elixir realm. Though their momentum was inferior to Kenneth, they were martial artists of impressive prowess. It only went to show how Cloud Hall was filled with people of overwhelming power and talent. From here on, Zen knew they had their work cut out for them. One steward guard of Cloud Hall cast a sweeping glance over them, his face unreadable. Now, you will be given a Cloud Hall token. This token will serve as a pass to Cloud Hall and mystical places for cultivation. Do not be careless with it, he said sternly. Then, he began calling out names according to the list. A disciple would step forward and take his Cloud Hall token upon being called. True to the words of the disciples from Cloud Hall, the ones who had just entered elite house were given a red token, the lowest rank. A glimpse of the Cloud Hall token reminded Zen of the voice-transmitting token Tia gave him. Both had clouds carved in their surface. The only difference was that the token Tia gave him was white, while his was red. According to the disciples of Cloud Hall, the Cloud Hall token was ranked by 5 colors, namely purple, yellow, golden, cyan and red. He wondered what rank was the voice-transmitting token that Tia had given him. While Zen was pondering over this, the guard suddenly called out his name. A look of surprise flashed across the faces of the 2 men. Zen, at the sudden sound of his name, the guard, upon seeing the color of the token. It was purple. A while ago, he was given the Cloud Hall tokens. Knowing that it would be for the newcomers of Elite House, he did not bother to check them one by one and threw them straight to the space ring. All he would do was pass them out to the new disciples one after another and call the name on its back. Or so he thought. He gaped in astonishment at the purple token he was holding in his hands. For a moment, he thought that there had been some mistake. Why was it purple? There were very strict rules about the colors of the Cloud Hall tokens giving out, precisely because it was what decided which kind of mystical places the disciples could go into. Under normal circumstances, the newcomers would only be given a red Cloud Hall token. However, it was true that there had been some exceptions. For instance, there had been times in the past when cyan Cloud Hall tokens were given to the new disciples. Those who possessed a great deal of talent were given this in place of the red one. But the chances were very slim. The most recent case of this happening was almost a decade ago. Even the leader of Cloud Sect, Kenneth, only had a golden Cloud Hall token, a middle ranking. These 2 stewards at the Internal Elixir realm only had a cyan Cloud Hall token. The golden token was a dream, which would take much more time and work for them to realize. A golden Cloud Hall token would mean the opening of more mystical places, ones that were far better than the ones at the accessible to a cyan Cloud Hall token holder. But getting a golden Cloud Hall token was a feat of extremely difficulty. Even long years of service at Cloud Hall had not been enough. So how was it that this kid, a newcomer of Elite House, could get a purple Cloud Hall token? There must have been a mistake. It might have been a mix-up. There was no other plausible explanation for it. Zen came to his sense quickly and stepped forward to take the purple Cloud Hall token. To his surprise, one of the steward guards told him to wait, without further clarification. He then trotted away with the purple Cloud Hall token. Soon, the hall was filled with the low sound of questioning murmurs. A purple Cloud Hall token? Even if Zen is the champion of the Cloud Road, there is no way that he would be given one. Is this some sort of joke? The purple Cloud Hall tokens are usually given to the elders, and even then, only a few of them manage to obtain one. How is it possible that Zen would be given one? Poor man. Soon enough his excitement will turn out to only be disappointment. He's no different from us. A red Cloud Hall token is more than enough to him. Before long, the steward guard came back with a complicated expression. This purple Cloud Hall token truly belongs to you, he said. The words that he uttered were like a thunderclap in the clear sky, silencing everyone in the room with shock. As an old saying goes, people don't worry about poverty, but fear the unfair distribution of wealth. Since everyone else were given a red Cloud Hall token which represented the lowest rank, why was it that Zen got the purple token? It was ridiculous. Chapter 395, Confidence and Courage. Seeing that Zen had received a purple Cloud Hall token, the disciples from the 5 grade 2 sects reluctantly accepted the unfairness. The disciples from Cloud Hall couldn't. Zen, who was he? That bumpkin from Cloud Sect who won the first place. The disciples of Cloud Hall used to win every time. Why didn't any of the participants who won previously get a purple Cloud Hall token? As the crowd's complaints got louder, a Cloud Hall steward snapped at them, "Shut up. If anyone makes any noise after this warning, I'm going to have them removed immediately." The disciples knew that Cloud Hall floated in the sky thousands of meters above the ground. Since most of them were at the illuminating soul realm and could fly, they wouldn't die if they got thrown out. But they understood what the steward had meant. He wasn't going to have them thrown to the ground. He was threatening to remove them from Cloud Hall. Therefore, the disciples kept quiet. They had practiced since childhood to meet the eligibility for admission to Cloud Hall. And most of them carried the hopes of their entire family. Even though they envied Zen, they were unwilling to be expelled from Cloud Hall because of this. In fact, the 2 stewards envied Zen as well. As the Internal Elixir Realm Masters, they hadn't received a purple Cloud Hall token yet either. They also wondered why Zen was an exception. Does he have a special relationship with our leader? One of them asked. She is well known for being chaste. I've never heard of her having a boyfriend, the other answered. The cultivators' world was unfair, and the stewards had already become used to it. Since there was no other logical explanation, the Cloud Hall stewards assumed that Zen had a powerful background and that they shouldn't mess with him. Therefore, the two stewards greeted him with respectful smiles. One steward even bowed a little as he handed Zen a purple Cloud Hall token with both hands. Then, the two stewards explained the rules and regulations of Cloud Hall to the disciples. They even spoke about matters that required attention, such as how to use the cultivating places and facilities, the forbidden areas, and so on. There were so many rules in Cloud Hall that it took the stewards about an hour. After that, the two stewards allowed the new disciples to leave the elite house. Zen walked out with Roche and Patrick. They had intended to get some trivial articles and find their rooms in the Cloud Hall. As soon as they exited Elite House, their eyes fell on a massive map on the wall. "This is the map of the Central Region," Roche said. In the past, Zen had thought that the Eastern region was vast. But now, as he saw the map of the Central Region, he understood why some people said the Eastern region was a small place. On the corner of the map, the orientation and size of the Eastern region had also been plotted. In contrast, if the Central region was an elephant, the Eastern region was only a little pig. The two were not at the same level simply from the perspective of the territory included in each region. Lewis walked toward the three young men as they studied the map. He had followed Zen since they met on Cloud Road. The map is very detailed. Almost all the forces in the Central region have been marked out. Lewis said as he analyzed the map. It was not difficult for the cultivators in the Central region to get this information. However, as warriors from the Eastern region, Zen and his friends were seeing a map of the Central region first time in their lives. Zen not only located Cloud Hall, which was labeled as a Grade 4 sect on the map, but he also saw the other three Grade 4 sects, namely, Bloodwood Cliff, Black Mountain Sect, and Mysterious Luna Hall. Cloud Hall was the strongest among the Grade 4 sects, which was only a little inferior to the Grade 5 sect. And the three Grade 4 sects, Bloodwood Cliff, Black Mountain Sect, and Mysterious Luna Hall, were also just slightly weaker than Cloud Hall as they had many internal Elixir Realm Masters. Ethereal Spirit Sect was the only Grade 5 sect. It was located in the heartland of the Central region. That place was called Ethereal City. As a Grade 5 sect, Ethereal Spirit Sect was both larger and stronger than Cloud Hall. It was said that the leader of Ethereal Spirit Sect had cultivated to a realm that ordinary people couldn't understand. Zen tried to keep the information in his mind. He soon noticed that there were several names marked on the map. So he asked with curiosity, "What about these names?" "Well, not all strong people like to establish a sect. Some of them are loners who prefer free life. Since they do not belong to any sect or group, we mark their names on the map," explained Lewis. He had always been a fan of gossip, so he was well informed. He pointed at the south end of the map. "Look at this one. The Venerable Starry is a strong master in the south of Central region." "Are all the strong cultivators listed here?" Zen asked. Zen scanned the map with anxious eyes as he asked. It was as though he were searching for something. Only a handful of people had been identified on the map. Undoubtedly, all of them were top masters, beyond the internal Elixir realm, in the Central region. And there were only about 10 people in all. Zen's eyes soon stopped on a name, Evil East Lord, Eddie Kui. This was the man who had taken Zen's sister, Yan. When Zen saw the name, his eyes narrowed. Even though he tried to control his emotions, Patrick and Roche could feel his anxiety and hatred. Patrick and Roche knew that Zen was under great pressure. When they were at Cloud Sect, they had also seen the giant face appear in the sky. At that time, they had only known him to be a strong warrior from the Central region, but they didn't know his name. Now, seeing Zen's eyes fixed on the name, they guessed who it was. Obviously, Evil East Lord was the cultivator from the Central region who had taken Yan. "Lewis, how about this man?" Zen pointed at Eddie's name and asked. Lewis' eyes blinked rapidly before he said, "The Evil East Lord. His skill is just so-so." He wanted to play a joke with his new friends. "Just so-so," Patrick and Roche exclaimed at the same time and stared at Lewis with a strange expression. In other words, there is no match for him in the Central region. Even the leader of the Grade 5 Ethereal Spirit Sect has to acknowledge his superior skills. Eddie is the strongest person in the Central region. He deserves the name, Evil Lord, Lewis praised. Hearing Lewis' words, Patrick and Roche shot him a dark look. They thought that Lewis must be a fool. Otherwise, why would he say so much to people he was meeting for the first time? Zen glared at the map as if he hadn't heard anything. Lewis' answer didn't surprise Zen. He knew exactly what kind of powers this man must have had to be able to force Cloud Sect to hand over Yan. Moreover, Cloud Sect was under Cloud Hall's supervision. So, Cloud Hall must know about the incident. Cloud Hall was afraid of Eddie as well. Cloud Hall was the best of the Grade 4 sects. It ranked second to the only Grade 5 sect, Ethereal Spirit Sect. If Eddie could force Cloud Hall to listen to him, he must, indeed, be extremely powerful. Eddie was known as the Evil East Lord, the #1 cultivator in the central region. In comparison to him, Zen was as insignificant as dust. Anger, fear, desperation, all kinds of negative emotions coursed through Zen. He knew that these emotions would not benefit him. All he could do was stay calm and silent to control himself. Hey, Zen, why do you ask about him? He is so famous. Haven't you heard of him before at Cloud Sect? No, your eastern region is too remote, Lewis started nagging. I have more information about him. You might be interested. It's said that he is going to arrange the lustful demon array. He is looking for the top 3 beauties to cultivate together in. You know what I mean, right? He also wants to be emperor and establish a holy kingdom in the central region. It would be a real feat that no one has achieved in central region for thousands of years. Hey, what's wrong with you? How come you are leaving without me? Lewis stopped his nagging as Zen left without saying a word. Roche and Patrick followed Zen. But before they left, Roche scolded Lewis, "Shut up. You idiot," Patrick added. Lewis stood there with a look of shock. I didn't provoke anybody, did I? He scratched his head with wonder. Unfortunately, the map only allowed Zen to get a rough idea of the distribution of forces in the central region. The map was not very detailed. After all, it was impossible for Cloud Hall to disclose top-secret information on a map and show it to all. Zen, wait. Roche and Patrick ran to Zen, who was hurrying forward. What's up? Zen responded without looking back. Sadness and helplessness filled his heart. Like any hard-working student, he had set a grand goal, hoping that one day he would achieve it. He spared no efforts to pass the final exam with a high score. But he was frustrated when he found that although outstanding, he was still far from his goal. His grand goal was like a star in the sky, high above him, blinking and taunting him. He could only look up at it, but not reach it. It was not that Zen was not good enough. It was just that his goal was in the sky, and that his current ability kept him at ground level. Even though Zen had never given up, challenging the most powerful cultivator in the central region would be suicide. His ambition was high, but he had to accept the cruel reality. Eddie is indeed very powerful, Roche said as he raised his eyebrows. He is the strongest man in the central region. I'm afraid that if he chooses to, he can destroy Cloud Hall. But, I have a hunch that one day, you will kill him. Patrick nodded. I believe that, too. Hearing what they said, a trace of a smile flashed on Zen's face. After a while, he grinned and turned to them. Do you guys really believe I can do it? I'm not comforting you. If other people hear us, they may think that we're daydreaming. But I really believe it will happen, Roche stated, and Patrick agreed with him as well. Their faith in Zen's abilities rekindled his hope and ambition. Zen's deep eyes shone like stars. Now that you believe in me, I will believe in myself too. One day, I'll kill him, Zen declared as he gritted his teeth. Although Zen didn't know how far he would go on the road to martial arts cultivation, he had to face this strong enemy sooner or later. He needed courage and confidence, both of which he had regained now. Chapter 396, Evil East Lord. At the same time, in the easternmost area of the central region, there was a huge mountain range. The mountains seemed to stretch into the sky. The range was so high that it safeguarded the continent from the tsunami in the chaotic ocean of stars. Owing to the altitude of the range, all the peaks were covered in a thick layer of snow, some as deep as 100 feet. The range was called a dead zone as it was impossible for people to climb out if they accidentally fell into the snow. Even cultivators at the illuminating soul realm dared not to go deep into the mountains even though they could fly. The snowstorm raging on the mountaintop was so fierce that the wind stung like knife blades. Besides, several unknown monsters, beasts, and terrifying creatures lived on the mountain range. Since these creatures could survive such harsh conditions, they were not easy to deal with. However, today, the snow on the highest mountain in the range had melted completely. The snow-covered peaks of the mountain range had been accumulating snow for thousands of years. Today, the snow on one peak had disappeared, revealing the black mountain that stood out in contrast to its nearby snow-capped peaks. A strong and bare torso man panted on the mountaintop. A gray flame burned behind him. Beneath his feet lay a snow flood dragon that was 500 feet in length. Snow flood dragons lived in the land of snow and ice. They were born fierce and powerful. The fierce snow flood dragon lay beneath the man's feet. Many parts of its huge body were burned. Little Eddie, didn't you say that you would take me to see the snow and eat a snow flood dragon's heart? You melted all the snow on the mountain. How do I see snow now? A woman dressed in a fox fur robe levitated in the air behind the strong man. She positioned herself such that it appeared as though she were lying on a bench beneath her. Her voice was so enchanting and sweet that people would be enraptured upon hearing her. What was more exciting was that she wore no other clothes except the fox fur robe, which covered only her breasts and private parts. Other parts of her body were uncovered, and her skin was so fair that it was whiter than the snow. Your seduction and complaints will not work. You wanted to see the snow, and I brought you here. You want to eat the snow flood dragon's heart. The strapping man bent down and removed the heart of the dying snow flood dragon. Fierce creatures like the snow flood dragon had strong bodies. Though it had been seriously injured, the snow flood dragon's heart still beat vigorously. The woman was frightened when she saw the pulsating and bloody snow flood dragon's heart. Oh, little Eddie, there is so much blood. How will I eat it? Do you want me to bring a chef here? The expression on the strapping man's face darkened. The enchanting woman floated to him slowly and wrapped her fair and thin arms around his neck and said, Little Eddie, I did not mean that. But on the day you practice lustful demon array, you must have 3 purple power bodies virginity energy. I have been reserving my body for you for 30 years. If you cannot find the 3rd purple power body, am I supposed to wait another 30 years? The strapping man suddenly grabbed the enchanting woman's hand, pulled her into his arms, and smiled flirtatiously. Don't worry, Yan's talent is no less than yours. Breaking through the internal elixir realm just needed 1 or 2 years. I already know of another purple power body. It won't take me long to find it, and then I can satisfy you. I will satisfy you well. Then, the strapping man ran his fingers on the enchanting woman's body, leaving a trail of the snow flood dragon's blood on her skin. The frightened woman screamed. The strapping man was the evil East Lord, and the enchanting woman's name was Marilyn C. Marilyn was a purple power body like Yan. She had been following Eddie for 30 years and had reserved her virginity till now for his lustful demon array. Most women were unwilling to cultivate the lustful demon array. In fact, the lustful demon array was not an evil cultivation that would sacrifice a female to a male. It was a huge cultivation that would benefit both genders. So, the lustful demon array was beneficial for both Eddie and Marilyn. When flirting with Marilyn, Eddie suddenly turned serious. Little Eddie, what's the matter? Marilyn asked with a sweet voice. Eddie sneered and said, Interesting. Very interesting. I sense a hint of killing intent. Eddie practiced a special cultivation method. Combined with his talent, the cultivation method could help him sense another person's intent to kill him. The evil East Lord, who was famous in the central region, had been envied and hated by several people. Since he was not a god, he couldn't hear people's thoughts. However, he could sense their strong killing intent. Only an enemy determined to kill him could generate such a strong killing intent. It meant that the enemy despised him so much at this moment that the enemy must kill Eddie. Though he could sense the existence of the killing intent, Eddie could not locate the enemy. Oh, Marilyn said with a puzzled look. Who dares to challenge our little Eddie? Aren't they afraid of being identified, chased, and killed by little Eddie? Aha, Eddie laughed. The strange thing is that the enemy seems very weak. But why would someone hate me so much? Eddie was confused. The master of the killing intent seems powerless in comparison to me. But his willpower is so strong. Who could it be? Whatever. If your enemy isn't powerful, then there's no need to worry. Marilyn chuckled and stretched out her hand, and daubed Eddie's face with the snow flood dragon's blood. Eddie appeared calm, but he didn't stop thinking about this mysterious enemy. He had sensed similar killing intent thousands of times during his life. Over time, many people had tried to kill him. Assassinating, killing, murdering, they had used all kinds of means and failed. There had been no exceptions. Eddie was too lazy to deal with those whose killing intent was meaningless. There was even a time when he had to shut down this troublesome sensing ability. So many people had been eager to kill him that he always had this sense of foreboding. The stress of continually receiving warnings was grueling for Eddie. And while several people had actually dared to try, no one had succeeded. But today, the hint of killing intent from this mystery enemy had been so strong that it shook Eddie to the core. He was confused. While his enemy had strong killing intent, he was as weak as an ant. So why did Eddie feel a bit nervous? Eddie was cautious, though he looked like an unwary man. If he could learn of his enemy's identity, he would probably kill this person. Unfortunately, he could only sense the killing intent, but not who it came from. Zen did not know that the moment he decided to kill Eddie, his opponent could sense his killing will even though he was 100,000 miles away. And Zen had not even spoken the words out loud. His will of martial arts was always strong. But today, he knew how large the gap was between him and the evil East Lord. And for a brief moment, Zen doubted himself. But he calmed down and reassured himself. Zen's will of martial arts had now become stronger than before. Seeing Zen's confidence restored, Roche and Patrick were very happy. Zen now needed to practice in Cloud Hall as he needed time to digest what he got from Cloud Road. Sitting cross-legged in the practice room, Zen rotated his hands like a wheel disc. The life vitality spun alongside his hands. As he rotated faster and faster, it became a whole circle. The malicious wheel of life and death was the most powerful attack method for the Blood Fiend Emperor. Unexpectedly, it's not complicated to practice. Looking at the rotating life vitality wheel, Zen smiled slightly. Though far from the first level, exterminating wheel, he had pretty much succeeded in giving it a proper shape. Cultivation methods concerning malicious aura had some advantages. They were easy to practice and more potent than other cultivation methods. Since it was a shortcut, countless people had been attracted to it. However, it did come with the risk of the cultivator being controlled and consumed by the malicious aura. But Zen, who had been to Killing Sword Mountain, did not have such a risk. How about trying the power of the exterminating wheel? Thinking of this, Zen extracted a piece of the malicious aura. The moment the blood-red malicious aura was put into it, the malicious aura rushed to the practicing room with the rotation of the exterminating wheel. The malicious aura was so powerful that it broke through the floor of the practicing room, several layers of the wooden flooring, the thick rock layer, and then over 400 feet of floating stone before hitting the ground, a kilometer away. Meanwhile, an alarm sounded outside the practicing room. Chapter 397, The Great Present from Tia. Did I really punch a hole through the floor of the Cloud Hall? Murmured Zen in surprise. A look of horror spread across his face. The power of the exterminating wheel had far exceeded his expectations. The raw power it produced shook him to the core. A ray of light shone through the tiny hole on the floor of the practice room. All disciples in the practice room clear out. Amidst the long wailing warning tune of the flute, Steward Xiao's voice boomed. Steward Xiao was one of the two stewards who handed out Cloud Hall tokens to the disciples a few days ago. Upon hearing the summons, Zen reluctantly removed the exterminating wheel and took a deep breath before he started for the door and promptly walked out. Outside, he found several disciples of the Illuminating Soul Realm looking at Steward Xiao in states of confusion. It seemed that they all had no idea why the alarm was sounded out of nowhere, nor did they know why Steward Xiao called them out there while they were busy cultivating. Who was it? Steward Xiao asked in an expression of barely concealed anger. Before he could finish his question, Zen stepped forth and presented himself. I apologize, Steward Xiao. I accidentally punched a hole through the floor in my practice room. The practice room on this floor was located at the lowest level of Cloud Hall, and not far below was a floating stone, surrounded by warning runes. No one had ever touched the floating stone before. All the practice rooms in Cloud Hall had myriad layers of protection. To use the practice room on this floor, one only needed to show the red Cloud Hall token. So all those who practiced martial arts in this level were mostly new disciples of the elite house. Given that the new disciples were relatively weak compared to the other batches, it was expected that they would cause little to no damage in the practice room, and so there were no strong shields on this floor. No one could have ever expected Zen's exterminating wheel powered by the malicious aura could be so powerful as to punch a hole through the practice room shields and break the floating stone of Cloud Hall. If the culprit were anybody else, the stern steward would have punished him accordingly without hesitation. Unexpectedly, upon learning that it was Zen who broke the shield, Steward Xiao's face immediately relaxed and all fury dissipated from his expression. His mouth formed into a huge grin and he said, "Oh, it's you, Zen. It's not your fault. The shields of the practice room on this level are weak. If you want to keep training, you can make use of the upper floors. This kind of accident will be avoided for sure." Once a purple Cloud Hall token was obtained, this qualified Zen to use the best practice room in Cloud Hall, which could only be used by the elders. Those rooms were made with the mightiest pig iron, and could withstand even the full force of a cultivator at the early stage of internal elixir realm. Noticing the sudden change in Steward Shao's mood, several other elite disciples were struck dumb for a moment and eventually sighed in unison upon realizing how fickle the steward was. However, they could not help but admire Zen. Zen, after all, had strong forces backing him, while they didn't have a single one. When Zen was conversing with the steward, the vitality that resided in between heaven and earth became erratic and suddenly converged towards the direction of one of the practice rooms. Steward Shao's face darkened yet again as he sensed the movement of vitality. Before he could speak, another explosion burst forth and the room that gathered the vitality blew to pieces. In the blink of an eye, a dark figure flew out of the practice room and stumped to the ground. The very next second, the figure slowly stood up and rubbed his forehead. It was Rocher. Steward Shao's head immediately ached as he surveyed the scene. This batch of elite disciples seemed to be stronger than any other batch. Zen just punched a hole through the floating stone mere moments ago, and this guy apparently decimated the practice room. Rocher shook his head to shake off the grogginess. At the sight of the stern steward's face and Zen, he sheepishly muttered an apology. "I'm sorry for the ruckus I caused, Steward Shao. I lost control of my strength for a moment while practicing." "What's your name?" snapped Steward Shao. He was unkind to everyone except Zen. "Rocher Hua," Rocher answered plainly. "You will compensate for the destruction you have caused. Since you have just arrived at the Cloud Hall, and lack the necessary points, I'll record it first and then deduct the necessary points when you earn later," Steward Shao declared boldly. "Steward Shao, Rocher and I are from the same sect. If you really want to charge him for the accident, you can just charge it to me," Zen interjected. "Charge it to you?" Steward Shao froze for a moment and then his face relaxed and his tone became noticeably softer. "In that case, I'll have to let it go," he said with a faint laugh. "I must warn you, though, to avoid the destruction of the practice room from now on." When Steward Shao left, Rocher heaved a sigh of relief and turned to Zen with a mischievous smile. "Thanks, Zen. Man, what you said really had some effect." Zen looked at him straight with an inquisitive shine in his eyes and asked, "Did you just break through?" Rocher nodded in acknowledgement and chuckled. "I had a vague idea that I was going to break through on the Cloud Road, but what I didn't expect was that I didn't get into the illuminating soul realm until now." There was a great barrier between the nature level and the illuminating soul realm. Rocher had been in the consummation of nature level long enough, and in terms of talent, he might not be as outstanding as Zen, but he was not inferior to any of the other elite disciples in Cloud Hall. Thus, as his power had accumulated to a certain degree, he naturally made a breakthrough. "By the way, Zen, have you acquired the method of distilling Devil Phantom's essence?" Rocher eagerly inquired. Zen and Rocher both gained a ton of Devil Phantom's essence along the Death Road. According to Tia, the said essence couldn't directly be used, since it was highly poisonous in its original state. Zen, though not afraid of any poison, wouldn't rush to consume it. It would be pointless to do so. Considering that the Devil Phantom's essence had soul-strengthening properties, Zen asked, "Do you really need it now?" Rocher nodded, smiled bitterly and continued, "Cultivating the heavenly sword requires a really strong soul. I can hardly keep it up without a tough soul. To take advantage of the heavenly momentum, the practitioner must be able to withstand the powerful momentum of both heaven and earth in the first place, and then diverted the heavenly momentum towards his opponent through the sword. How could a practitioner deal a strong blow if he himself couldn't handle the momentum?" Rocher's soul wasn't weak before, and it was at least strong enough to bear the sword, but after he stepped into the illuminating soul realm, his soul couldn't handle the heavenly momentum anymore. This could all be attributed to the fact that now he was able to draw more of the vitality between heaven and earth and take advantage of even more heavenly momentum, but this also meant he needed to take on even more momentum within his soul. The accident was caused by Rocher's failure to control the gathered vitality, causing it to implode and detonate, blowing up the entire practice room where he was cultivating. Zen flashed Rocher a faint smile and said, "I'll help you ask about extracting method for the Dark Devil Phantom's essence, but I have something for you in the meantime. You can use this first." With that said, Zen tapped onto his space ring and promptly took out a red treasure chest. Rocher's face lit up like a Christmas tree when he heard that Zen would inquire about the purification process. Since Zen had narrowly escaped from the Flood Dragon's jaws, Rocher also realized that the mysterious disciple from the Cloud Hall also survived. Zen didn't tell him who the disciple was, and Rocher dared not ask. He was about to thank Zen when he saw a delicate red treasure chest appear on the palm of Zen's hand. What is it? He asked, his eyes full of curiosity. Go on, open it. Then you'll know, Zen chuckled, deliberately maintaining the suspense. With gusto, Rocher opened the chest. The very next second, some kind of black matter shot towards the middle of his eyebrows. Like Zen's first time, Rocher reflexively tried to dodge, but failed spectacularly, so the black soul essence stuck to him. Feeling no ill intent from the black matter, Rocher closed his eyes and accepted the nourishment for his soul. It felt incredibly comfortable, as if his soul was being caressed by a pair of soft invisible hands. To his amazement, his soul grew stronger at an alarming rate. When Rocher opened his eyes again, his eyes could see so clearly. Oh my goodness, Zen, it's some kind of soul enhancer. Rocher exclaimed with an excited look. Zen had a huge grin on his face as he nodded and said nothing. Zen's sudden display of generosity embarrassed Rocher. Rocher, who was badly in need of soul strengthening, and was a proud man by nature, was at a loss for words when he found himself owing Zen big time. It's just one of the treasure chests that I found on the Cloud Road. That is the soul essence that was extracted from the Devil Phantom's essence. Zen tried to ease Rocher's discomfort. Don't look at me like that. It's not that valuable, Zen emphasized while looking at Rocher with amusement on his face. Zen still had several red treasure chests just like this one, and he had not used them yet. So, giving Rocher one of these chests wasn't that much of a loss. But Rocher thought differently. Having accepted the chest, he took this as a big favor to him. In fact, the elite disciples of Cloud Hall who watched them thought the same. Their faces were various looks of admiration. Zen had just become the richest man in their hearts. They all wanted to come over and form friendships with Zen. The elite disciples in the room all came from good families. As members of the Central Region, the worst of their families was at Grade 2, whose power was comparable to Cloud Sect. However, they were all reluctant to give away treasures like soul essence. Well, we're from the same sect, so forget about it, Zen gently muttered. Right then and there, he heard a soft, sweet voice. Hey, you've been at the Cloud Hall for several days, but you haven't even contacted me. Whined the voice. It was because of me that you got a purple Cloud Hall token, and you haven't even showed me a shred of gratitude. How insufferable you are. Tia had given Zen a message token, so they could communicate without even a message rune. Zen, however, was taken aback when Tia's voice suddenly spoke in his ear. Zen should have thanked Tia, not only because of the purple Cloud Hall token, but because he hadn't encountered any difficulties yet since he came to the Cloud Hall. He could practice to his heart's content thanks to her. Zen had a really hard time when he first entered the Cloud Sect. Now the treatment he received in the Cloud Hall was drastically different from then, and most of the people here showed him respect. Now tell me why I should show you my gratitude. I haven't forgotten that I should have a half share of the heavenly fruit tree. Besides, there are a lot of things that actually belong to me, but I haven't received them yet. So who should I really be thanking? Zen passed on his words via the message token using a small amount of his life vitality. You call yourself a man. How can you be so evil? Besides, your present realm is just too low, and it's certainly not the right time for you to devour the heavenly fruit. Just keep trying to improve your strength, but it's too boring cultivating in the practice room, so I'll give you a great present, hee hee. Tia laughed. Hearing Tia's laughter, Zen found her voice so horrifying that it almost turned his blood to ice. He had a terrible feeling about what was coming next. Chapter 398. Lose control of the body. The top of the Cloud Hall was wrapped in a mass of thick clouds. The palace at the top was not made of bricks and stones, but it looked like it was made out of piled-up mysterious ice. It was just an ice palace. The pile of mysterious ice was crystal clear and it was radiating cold gas. Even in midsummer and under a cloudless blue sky, it seemed like the ice wouldn't be melted away by the sun. If a normal person approached the ice, his blood would freeze within a few seconds, and his whole body would become stiff and lifeless just like a sculpture. Tia's white, naked feet were dangling from an ice-carved throne, and she stared at a high picture slab in front of her with smile, reclining lazily in her throne. Beside her, a small phoenix made of ice nestled in her arms. It looked more beautiful than before with bushier feathers. Next to Tia stood a middle-aged man in cyan, a solemn expression upon his face. All right, Morphins, now it's your turn, said Tia. Morphins was one of the Cloud Hall elders and as such, he was good at the skills of space and illusion. He, alongside Emmanuel, was regarded as the backbone of the Cloud Hall. They were equal in their power and cultivation level. Is it all right that we do so? Morphins asked a bit hesitantly. What's the matter? This guy is so annoying and I've really been wanting to teach him a lesson for a long time. Tia replied, wrinkling her small nose. Even if he took half of Blood Fiend Emperor's heritage from you, he is still a disciple of the Cloud Hall. As you said, this boy has a wonderful talent for cultivation, and he could be classified as a saint-level genius. Thus, he deserves the heritage, and we should help him improve in the Cloud Hall, Morphins reasoned, shaking his head. Tia glanced at Morphins. Her eyes narrowed. What should we do? I know that better than you. Just do as what I said, she said coldly. Morphins immediately felt a bit stressed. Nodding, he replied, now that you believe acting in this way can hone Zen, I have no comment. In truth, Morphins wasn't at all worried about Zen's safety. He knew that the boy would be okay. However, it was Tia's behavior that he was concerned with. Our leader is too young. Morphins sighed internally and then reached out his hands. 10 light spots appeared on each of his fingertips and quickly turned into white energy lines that stretched out of the ice palace. While this was going on, Zen was still talking with Tia. What gift? Could you say it clearly again? He was asking. Just then, Zen suddenly felt a trace of energy fluctuations around himself. Because of Tia's words, Zen had a feeling that something bad would happen, and his first instinct was to dodge the energy. As they looked on, Roche and the other Cloud Hall disciples were puzzled about why Zen was acting strangely. Then Zen was standing so still, as if someone had charmed him to stay unmoving. Zen, what's wrong with you? Asked Roche. Zen didn't answer, but just ran upwards. By now, Zen found he had lost control of his body, like there were many thin lines connected to his body. These lines were stimulating his muscles and made him run. In other words, his body was being controlled by someone. This was just one of Morphin's abilities. He could take control of others' bodies and make them do things before they could sense that anything was wrong. However, the ability would have a limited effect during actual combats. On the one hand, Morphins didn't need to control someone weaker than himself, but on the other hand he was also not able to control someone stronger. In fact, the biggest thing of the ability was to control puppets. While he used this method to control puppets, the combat effectiveness of the puppets would be greatly enhanced, and he could almost do anything by using puppets at will. Zen was running farther into the Cloud Hall and very soon, he was at a gray building. Under Morphin's control, he ran up to the door of the gray building and kicked at it hard. The gray building was a competition field where the disciples of Cloud Hall competed with each other. However, the disciples were at different power levels, and those coming to this gray building usually held red or cyan Cloud Hall tokens. These disciples were just into the illuminating soul realm for a short time, and, among them, the one having the highest power level was around the level 6 of the illuminating soul realm. Some disciples were fighting against each other in the fighting field, and when Zen kicked down the door, he could see all of these battles. The most eye-catching competition was the battle between Frank Joe and Finley Joe. Finley was Frank's older brother, 3 years older and much stronger than Frank. Regardless of his power, Finley's status in the Joe clan was lower than Frank as his cultivation talent was not as good as Frank's. Frank was believed to be able to surpass his brother as long as he kept practicing hard. But at the moment, Frank could not rival Finley. They were holding spears and fighting against each other. The crowd around the battle could only see their fast-moving figures. They cheered each time one of the brothers moved. After all, they were Emmanuel's sons and they really had great power. At least, they proved that their power was far beyond the others at the same refinement level. Boom! All the disciples turned to the door at the sound of it being kicked open, and they ceased all fighting. It was a fighting arena and there were many talented disciples. If someone said some provocative words, he would be beaten. So, one usually kept a low profile when he came here for fear of being bullied too much. So the disciples all had a look of confusion on their faces as they looked at who it was that kicked open the door. When they saw that Zen was just a nature creature, they were stunned. They wondered how a nature creature could become one of the Cloud Hall elite disciples. They didn't understand why a nature creature would be so arrogant. Most of the disciples didn't know Zen. After all, Zen had joined the Cloud Hall only a short time ago, and only those coming in with him knew him. Inside the arena, only Frank knew him. The disciples stared at Zen. What did this guy want to do? Zen actually was rather upset. He cursed Tia internally when he figured out what her so-called gift was. He was not afraid of challenging any opponent, but he thought that Tia was a bit too anxious. He was planning on practicing for a while and advancing onto a much higher level before coming to the arena, but here he was, controlled and at the area without his own free will. However, the disciples didn't expect the next words that would come out of Zen's mouth. After Zen, controlled by Morphins, stepped into the arena, he flipped off all of the disciples and crowd present and yelled, "You losers! Who dare challenge me?" It became dead silent, and Zen wanted to cry. He had no intention at all to cause harm or say those ugly words, but he was powerless to control even his fingers. Nothing he did, as well as nothing he said, was his doing. It was all Morphin's doing. "Tia, I will teach you a lesson later," Zen roared internally. Suddenly, he felt as if he had regained control of his own body. Slowly he moved, trying to confirm this, and when he saw that he indeed had control again, he took a deep bow before the crowd and the disciples inside the area. "Sorry, I came to the wrong room." He straightened and turned to exit the area, but behind him, Finley sneered loudly, "Are you sure you want to go back out after saying those arrogant words?" "No way." He raised a hand and made a small gesture, the doors shut closed. How funny. Finley jumped out of the fighting field and walked towards Zen. "Among the Cloud Hall elite disciples, there is even a nature creature. That is really unusual, and this guy even dares to challenge us. What an arrogant idiot. Did you ask us who dared to challenge you? Well, let me tell you. I will." Zen stretched out his hands and made a gesture of apology. Then he smiled and said, "Just now. What you've heard was not said by me. I can explain. Brother, he is that Zen Luo. He got first place on the Cloud Road this year," Frank said from behind Finley. A noise of recognition rippled through the crowd and the disciple. They had not met Zen personally, but already, they had heard his name. Already, Zen had a reputation at the Cloud Hall, everyone knew him by name. It was widely known that he was very powerful but was at low cultivation level. "Oh, so, you are the one who made my father angry," said Finley coldly. "Don't try to explain anything." Frank stepped forward in front of Finley. "Brother, you do not need to do anything to him. Just watch. I can beat him easily. These guys from small towns are so haughty. They need to learn a lesson or two." Zen was watching the brothers, his mouth agape a little. At Finley's words, he closed his mouth and an expression of resolution appeared on his face. He had wanted to explain his being under control and forced to say what he did, but now he wanted to play into their presumptions about him, he wanted to act more haughtily. "Do you want to teach me a lesson? Well, I just want to say that back to you," Zen said coldly, wrinkling his forehead slightly. Chapter 399, High-Speed Spinning. When Zen had entered the Cloud Hall, he honestly wanted to keep out of trouble. He still needed time to think about what he had obtained in the Cloud Road. The best thing to do was to focus on practice and stay away from any distractions. However, Tia obviously didn't let him have his way. She had done a bit of a trick. The real strength she exhibited in the Cloud Road was only at the level of illuminating Soul Realm. According to the Cyan Dragon, she had drawn out her original cultivation base and started over. Since she had just returned to the Cloud Hall only recently, it was impossible for her to level up so rapidly. Thus, Zen assumed that there must be some Cloud Hall masters who had her back and did a trick to control his body. "This hateful woman, is she going to ruin me?" Zen thought. Then again, he had already made a spectacle, so he had to face the consequences. This was Tia's scheme, she took him by surprise, so now he couldn't escape. Besides, even if he wanted to escape, there was no way he could evade trouble now. Meanwhile, Frank raised his eyebrows and his eyes glinted fiercely. He had never hated on anyone since he started to practice in the Cloud School. He had always given off the impression of a young, handsome gentleman and he seemed to have a special aura around him. He never got issues with the others because he never paid attention to those on the same level as him. Moreover, he certainly didn't take whatever they did to him to heart. When it came to Zen, however, Frank found it hard to be open-minded. He had always thought that he was the best of the best and the most fortunate among everyone. He thought that no one in the same level could be on par with him. However, the journey on the Cloud Road was a big blow for him. He never thought that a strong opponent came from a mere second-grade sect. Based on Zen's talents or potential, it was highly possible that he might surpass Frank in the future. Frank thought that he was the most gifted and talented in the Cloud Hall ever since it was established. He would never allow anyone like Zen to threaten his position. Thus, he had long planned to find a chance to cause trouble for Zen. Firstly, he wanted to force Zen to tell him the secret of the Cloud Road. Secondly, Zen had a lot of devil phantom essences with him. How did such precious things fall into the hands of a nobody from the eastern region? Wasn't that a big waste of the treasure? On that day when his father Emmanuel had questioned Zen, Emmanuel suddenly received a message through the message rune. He retreated after he got the message, which was strange. Frank had no idea what had happened. But since his father didn't explain anything, he planned to get what he wanted all by himself. Zen, do you think that you can do anything you want with what you achieved in the Cloud Road? You're not qualified to teach me. Frank's shoe roughly scratched the ground as he stood in an offensive stance. If you don't believe this, Frank started, lifting his white spear as he pointed it towards Zen. Then the spear in my hand will make you believe. Cultivators who sparred with each other for practice and skills improvement seldom directed the point of a spear or a sword at their opponents. It was provocative. Unless it was a real battle or the person just hated his opponent, nobody would act so imprudently in usual cases. Frank had felt like the latter. Even if Zen had shown how strong he was still nothing to Frank. Zen cast a cold look at the spear's pointed end. Frank's spear was quite powerful. He realized that this battle was inevitable. Patrick's green lotus karma fire failed to just burn the flying yaksha's skin, but Frank had killed it with his long spear. Fair enough. It's true that it's not my place to decide who can teach a lesson to whom, so let's see if your spear can have the say over my sword, Zen calmly said as he slowly drew out his blood-drinking sword. As soon as he finished his words, he struck first to gain the upper hand. He stood in a very strange stance and charged with the equally strange sword steps. The blood-drinking sword cut into the air and shot straight at Frank. The spear's advantage lay in its length. What made one thing stand above others could be summed up to 4 short words, a little bit more, as the saying went. It was why Zen had struck first. He wanted to quickly get close to Frank to engage him in a dogfight. However, Frank had practiced with the spear for over a decade. How could he not know what Zen had thought? He swiftly turned and made a gesture of attacking. The spear energy suddenly appeared and formed a solid wall, then its irresistible force attacked Zen. It was impossible for Zen to dodge the spear energy, no matter how fast or strong his movements were. Thus, he had no choice but to back down. The attack drew a distance between them, so there was enough room for Frank to use his spear in any way he wanted. He wielded it more fiercely as the spear's point flashed silver lights. It constantly charged at Zen's chest, but Zen had managed to dodge it with his sword steps. Air stab, cycle stab, spiral stab. Frank swung his spear around and did 3 movements in a row. He rushed aggressively towards Zen as the long spear sliced through the air and stirred up a gust of wind. Zen grew more cautious as he fought against Frank's quick moves and excellent spear techniques. He constantly used the circle parry to deflect Frank's attacks. However, the building space was limited, and every move Frank did with his spear came too close at Zen. Thus, Zen was forced to back down a lot, and was finally cornered when Frank used the 3 consecutive spear movements. Frank's eyes glittered with smugness. He had already gauged Zen's real strength through the test on the Cloud Road. Zen was stronger than Rocher, and a little stronger than Patrick. Compared to him however, Zen still fell behind. If Zen had already entered the illuminating soul realm, Frank wasn't sure if he could beat him. Unfortunately, this guy was too impatient. Zen was only a nature creature but he dared to challenge Frank. He had recklessly courted death. Since he asked for it anyway, Frank decided to satisfy him and make him know how defeat felt. Super spinning spear, Frank shouted. He suddenly flew into the air. His body and his spear became one. Then he rushed forward at Zen who was driven to a dead end. When they were in the Cloud Road, flying was forbidden. Frank had to use a technique where he pushed his feet off the ground and leapt. But now they were in the Cloud Hall, so Frank flew directly into the air. Zen couldn't move backwards anymore as he was stuck in a dead end. His face scrunched into a frown as he observed Frank whose body integrated itself with the spear, and fiercely lunged at him. Zen recognized that it was the technique that killed the flying yaksha. It was quite a powerful technique. He had seen Frank use it before. Although Zen's body was a spiritual weapon with a strong defensive power, he estimated that his body was still weaker than the flying yaksha after it transformed into a golden one. Since the super spinning spear attack had killed the flying yaksha, then it could surely kill Zen. It's impressive that a nature creature could reach such level. But for me, he won't be able to resist this blow from Frank, a Cloud Hall elite said. Of course, he's surely dead this time. It's true that this technique is Frank's secret weapon, but not his most powerful one. Finley, who watched the battle on one side, said with a laugh. If Frank used his spear of annihilation, even I would need to be careful while fighting him, he added. This guy has the talent and strength which entitled him to his arrogance, but he is too impatient. I'm afraid he could really sweep all of us away when he enters the illuminating soul realm, another Cloud Hall elite commented as he watched Zen with mixed feelings. He was quite impressed by Zen's use of sword steps. Frank's super spinning spear had almost reached Zen in the blink of an eye. The fast spinning spear point formed a strong vortex, which looked like it could grind anything that came near it into smithereens. At that moment, Zen suddenly rolled his eyes. A purple-black light lit up the tip of his blood-drinking sword. It was his demonic life vitality. After that, Zen slightly turned his wrist, and the blood-drinking sword began to turn at the same time as well. The sword drew a perfect circle in the air in a flash, then the demonic life vitality on the sword's tip followed the circle's path. The faster Zen turned his wrist, the quicker the circle spun. After a short while, an exterminating wheel appeared in front of Zen. Frank also saw the black ring, but thought nothing much of it. His super spinning spear was extremely powerful. It could turn anything that came in its way into ashes. A powerful weapon could beat 10 warriors that came at it. No matter how ingenious Zen's trick was, his game was only a child's play for Frank. However, when the tip of Frank's spear poked the black ring, a strong force suddenly pushed him to spin at the circle's speed. His spear's point was now firmly attached to the black ring as well. What happened? Frank suddenly felt dizzy. He had to maintain a high spinning speed to use his super spinning spear technique. Now, the black ring made his spinning speed many times faster. The Cloud Hall elites that watched the battle also noticed there was something very strange. At the beginning, they thought that Frank intentionally sped up the spinning. In the super spinning spear technique, the faster the spear spun, the more power it could produce. But hadn't Frank spun too fast? The speed was too much that they could barely see Frank's face. He now looked like a dazzling flash of bright light because of his high-speed revolution. His body twisted around like a silver carp in surging water. A smile crossed Zen's face. He already had a clear idea about the properties of the exterminating wheel due to his practice in the past few days. The first technique of the malicious wheel of life and death seemed to use the life vitality to form a high-speed spinning life vitality wheel. The spinning life vitality wheel sucked in anything that went into it, and then it shot them out. Zen didn't fully understand the theory behind this technique yet because he hadn't completely mastered the malicious wheel of life and death. He was at the very initial stage of the exterminating wheel. Moreover, before he used this skill, he only assumed that the exterminating wheel might suck Frank's spear into it. That was when Zen decided to give it a try. If the exterminating wheel failed to resist Frank's spear, then he would immediately summon Lily and the huge sword of the Blood Fiend Emperor. He would use the huge sword to deflect Frank's attack. However, most of the disciples of the Cloud Hall had seen the huge sword when they were on the Cloud Road. It would certainly cause a spectacle if he used the sword. It surprised him that the exterminating wheel had worked well. At least Frank didn't look too good now. The wind whistled past Frank's ears. He spun and spun more rapidly and he couldn't stop. He now felt very dizzy and couldn't think clearly because the speed was too much. He couldn't even say a word now because of the ultra-high speed of spinning. He could only grasp his white spear to keep him upright. Several Cloud Hall elites were also stunned. They didn't have any clue what was happening now. Finley certainly didn't know that the black ring Zen conjured was the technique in the Blood Fiend Emperor's malicious wheel of life and death. However, he sensed that Frank was in trouble. That's enough. Let go of Frank, he shouted coldly. However, Zen turned a deaf ear to Finley. He has hands and legs. If he wanted to stop, he could just loosen up his hands and get out of it himself, he sneered. It was true that Zen's exterminating wheel only locked Frank's spear, but not his hands and legs. If Frank dropped his spear, he could get out. I'm telling you to let him go, Finley said icily once again. He lifted his bloody red spear and was prepared to fight. Okay, all of you in the Joe family are unreasonable. You can't win in a one-on-one fight, so come in groups. Shame on you. Alright, I'll release him. Zen seethed, then waved his hand to stop the exterminating wheel. The exterminating wheel went into a halt, but Frank still spun crazily fast. The exterminating wheel's force had stopped, but the inertia transferred the high-speed spinning into Frank and threw him up to the ceiling. His body hit the ceiling and left a gaping hole in it, then he fell on the ground with a loud thud. Chapter 400. Spear of Annihilation. Watching the scenes unfold before them, the elite disciples of Cloud Hall were struck dumb, unable to get a word out. Most of them were at level 4, 5, or 6 of the illuminating soul realm, a little higher than Frank. But if they really fought Frank out in battle, none could defeat him, for he was a heaven-level talent. He was far stronger than he looked and often fought warriors at higher levels with little difficulty. But now, Frank had been challenged by a disciple of a lower level. The elites could not wrap their minds around the fact that the boy was only at grade 4 of the nature level. Frank was a beginner at the illuminating soul realm. He could easily make dead meat of a disciple at grade 4 or 5. The elites would have found it acceptable if both sides were at the illuminating soul realm. Not to forget, Frank had an array of unusual talents and resources under his belt. His father had made sure he had been carefully cultivated. His one meal would probably cost many other warriors everything they owned. How could any of them compare to that? But then what about Zen? It was a profound gap between grade 4 of the nature level and initial stage of the illuminating soul realm. The other disciples found it incredible that the young boy, still wet behind the ears, had challenged a practiced disciple. Everyone was all too aware of the marked difference between them. But now, they couldn't help but realize why Zen had been so arrogant before. He was strong enough to challenge even Frank. As the other elite disciples stood looking shocked at what was happening, Frank emerged out of the hole. At the moment, his hair was disheveled, his eyes blazing red with fury. His current appearance strayed from his usual look of cold elegance. Frank looked unhinged, like an enraged animal. His gaze stared daggers at Zen. "Zen," he called out hoarsely, "I don't care who is backing you. You must be killed." Previously, Frank hadn't planned on killing Zen. That day after Frank's father heard someone's voice message in his ears, he instantly left without a word. It was surmised that the voice message came from a senior of the Cloud Hall. It might even have been Cloud Hall's head herself. Frank hadn't wanted to put Zen to death at first when he decided to fight him. But now he raged uncontrollably. Any sense of rationality and wisdom had vanished like ice in hot weather. Bits of gray death aura hovered over his body, as if belonging to a man who had been dead since a long time ago. The dragon texture appeared over his white spear, blood red light glittering inch by inch on it. Once the red illuminated starkly, it started to turn dark. As it did so, a black dragon texture materialized, replacing the previous red one. It had a clear and strong death aura. "Frank, do you mean to use your killing skill?" Finley asked, his face turning pale. He hadn't expected this, for Zen was at such a low level compared to Frank. Hearing Finley, the other elite disciples, too, lost color on their faces. The skill was the Spear of Annihilation. Most of them had heard about this skill, as it was Emmanuel's unique talent. Emmanuel had become famous for it. It was said that only a warrior with an innate talent for communicating with the Ghost Dom could practice the skill of the Spear of Annihilation. Ghost Dom was something that was supposed to be indecipherable to the warriors of this world. The records mentioning it in secret books and legends did not go into much detail either. There were only 2 people who had this talent, and they were Emmanuel Joe and Frank Joe. It was the exact reason why Emmanuel cherished Frank so much, even though Emmanuel had so many other heirs. Frank had the same special ability as him. In fact, Frank might even surpass his father once his full potential was developed. Death aura radiated from Frank's body, flying undisguised around his white spear. Engulfed in it, Frank was a figure of terror. Tia and Morphin stood inside the ice palace at the top of Cloud Hall. They stared at the picture slab without blinking. Frank is about to use his skill of Spear of Annihilation. He cannot yet wield it fully, but it is still powerful enough. "I'm afraid Zen cannot survive it," Morphin said. As per Morphins, Zen would find it unable to bear Frank's Spear of Annihilation. Just as its name suggested, the skill demanded absolute annihilation. Frank had suffered a heavy hit by Zen just moments ago. He would surely spare no effort in using this skill. An icy fog hazed Tia's vision, her eyes looking momentarily surprised. "Don't worry, let's see how Zen fights it. I think he can do it. The power of the malicious wheel of life and death is not weaker than that of the Spear of Annihilation." Tia was familiar with the Spear of Annihilation. Before going to the trial, Tia had been attentive of Frank's Spear of Annihilation and had planned to ask him to break the enchanted barrier. But later, she chose Zen. Perhaps this was how it was meant to be. How powerful was the Blood Fiend Emperor? Since he had chosen the malicious wheel of life and death as his main cultivation method, how could its power not compare to that of the Spear of Annihilation? Even though Zen had practiced the malicious wheel of life and death for only a short period of time, Tia was still confident in him. More importantly, this would be a great test for him. Although Morphans had heard that Tia could obtain the inheritance of the Blood Fiend Emperor with Zen's help, he still doubted Zen's power. Like most other warriors, he thought Zen's cultivation level too low. Tia seemed not to worry about Zen in this situation. Morphans didn't say anything more, choosing to gaze at the picture slab instead. Wisps of grey death aura gathered around Frank's white spear. A single glance at it hurt the souls of the warriors as if they had been damaged somehow. With the white spear in his hand, Frank was like a spirit from the ghost dom. My skill of Spear of Annihilation can destroy every way in the world. Zen, let me see how you fight me now, he bellowed. Watching the extremely powerful spear, Zen's expression was grave. He began his exterminating wheel at once. At the same time, he drew 3 pieces of malicious aura from the Killing Sword Mountain. The cultivation method employed in the use of malicious aura was usually extraordinary. 1 piece of malicious aura could equip the skill with great power, while 3 of them could do that much more. However, Zen had not stored up too much of the malicious aura. When he had been back at the Luo clan, he received some malicious aura after killing the blood prisoner. Then he entered Cloud Road and gathered some piecemeal, stocking in the Killing Sword Mountain. Besides that, he also gained some on the Dead Road by killing hundreds of Dark Devil phantoms in battle. Zen felt reluctant to use so much of his malicious aura in a single fight alone. But he had to pull out all stops contending with Frank. Zen Luo, you must die. Frank roared again. The Spear of Annihilation together with the strong death aura rushed at Zen. The bystanders felt their hearts tighten. Frank had inherited it all from Emmanuel. No one knew exactly how powerful the skill was, but all of them sensed the great strong force reverberating behind it. At the same time, Zen waved his sword, the 3 bits of malicious aura blazing forth. Generally, a warrior who had cultivated in the killing way had abundant malicious aura with him. Others could sense it when upon seeing such a warrior. Zen's sword spirit, Lily, was such an example. If he called her out, others could sense the malicious aura in her at the very first sight itself. But things were different with Zen. When Zen had put his malicious aura in the Killing Sword Mountain, he looked quite ordinary, as if he did not have any of that aura with him. Now that his malicious aura had emerged out, he looked like a malicious god himself. What? How does he look so different now? He has such a strong malicious aura. He didn't seem like he practiced in the killing way before, did he? An elite disciple asked. You are right, I never sensed any malicious aura in him before. So how did he? Someone else commented. It's incredible that Zen chose the killing way. Isn't he afraid of getting hurt by the malicious aura? Just as the elite disciples looked on in wonder, Zen put the 3 pieces of malicious aura into his blood-drinking sword. He raised a foot and pulled back his arm, his body tilting forward as the sword rushed at the exterminating wheel swiftly. Ping! The malicious aura, as thick as a man's arm, swerved toward Frank ominously. Generally, the elite disciples did not use their real powers when fighting each other. They stopped before they hurt their opponents for real. But at the moment, both Zen and Frank seemed to want to use their best skills. The other elite disciples standing close and watching them now stepped back, fearing getting hurt by this great power. Ping! They had expected the two would make quite a stir when they started fighting. But this was beyond their imaginations. They heard a light brittle sound. Zen's blood-drinking sword had hit Frank's white spear. As if in a daze, the other elite disciples saw with their very own eyes how Frank's white spear started to crack. Little by little, the medium-grade spiritual weapon splintered like rotten wood until it was nothing but a number of lone white fragments. The white spear kept breaking from the pointy end like a chain reaction until the malicious aura arrived at the handle that Frank's palm was circled around. The onlookers saw how his arm twisted into an unbelievable shape. Then they heard the same noise of a crack coming from his arm. The bones in his right arm had been shattered into pieces just like the white spear in his hand. Ah! The severe pain made Frank shriek. He collapsed, rolling over on the ground in agony. Finley Joe rushed over to Frank, taking out a fresh, white pill. He put it in Frank's mouth. Although Frank took the healing pill in time, his right arm barely recovered. It was certainly not as strong as it had been previously. A broken bone could be healed by pills, but it would take a long time for Frank's arm to fully recover. Moreover, even if the bones were all healed and patched up, the arm would not be as strong as it used to be. Finley's face fell. He stood up, watching Zen with a cold smile. I never expected you to be so powerful. You not only survived Frank's spear of annihilation but also broke his arm. Finley clenched his jaw, barely holding back his anger. Zen blinked, smiling calmly. Spare me your accusations. Frank would have killed me if I hadn't broken his bones. In some ways, I was kind enough to break only his one arm. I should have taken his life for what he wanted to do to me. Go to perdition. Finley stared at him menacingly. As Finley shouted, his blood-red spear flew at Zen. Finley was at grade 9 of the illuminating soul realm, which meant he was close to consummation at the realm. He was far stronger than the other opponents Zen had met. However, as Finley's spear zoomed at him, Zen's body suddenly drifted into the air. He was flying. Seeing this, the elite disciples were stunned. Their eyes widened, rounding into saucers. They were gobsmacked. Was Zen actually a nature creature? If so, how could he fly?